Stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policy. Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and those people watching on the webcast. This is a Mayor's Question Time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. In a case of an emergency and any need to exit the building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow security staff and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of microphones. Can I ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to welcome students who've come all the way from the Department of Political Science at Montana State University to City Hall today. Hi. Hi, guys. I was going to say you'll come back now, but it's the wrong part of the United States, so it's not going to work, really. Since the last all-Assembly member meeting at the annual meeting on the 4th of May, the Mayor and the London Assembly hosted a special event at City Hall to mark the historic occasion of the coronation of their Majesties King Charles III and Queen Camilla. The Police and Crime Committee wrote to the Mayor and the Home Secretary in relation to Sir Thomas Windsor's review of the resignation of Dame Cressida Dick as Metropolitan Police Commissioner. Following an investigation into light and noise pollution, the Environment Committee wrote to the Commissioner of Transport for London calling for more transparency on the reporting of tube noise levels and urged TfL to improve its complaints procedure. The Environment Committee also published a report calling for an urgent review of the current Solar Together London contract. The Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee discussed whether issues raised in the Independent Culture Review of the London Fire Brigade are being addressed through its training programme. And the Environment Committee examined community energy in London, how rising energy prices has affected these schemes, and what the Mayor and the GLA are doing to increase community energy schemes across the capital. Can I ask the Assembly to note this on declarations of interests? Can I ask the Assembly to note the interests set out at item 2? Thank you. I can't do this on my own. Do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? Have a pause. It looks like everyone's okay. Let's move on to the Mayor's report. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 10th of March to the 4th of May 2023? Thank you. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report, and the Mayor has been requested to raise an issue by Assembly Member Russell. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Onka Sahota for ensuring these meetings were held mostly in an orderly fashion, and for helping Assembly members perform their democratic duty in holding me to account over the past 12 months. Can I also warmly welcome back his successor. Chair, we share our political differences, but can I offer you my congratulations? I'd like to provide colleagues and those in the audience and those watching an update on the progress City Hall has made in tackling the greatest challenge facing Londoners today, the housing crisis. There really is nothing more important than home. But far too many people in our capital, for them, housing is a source of stress and misery. As Mayor, I want London to be a city for everyone, a place where renters have security, where no one is forced to sleep rough on the streets, and where all Londoners have the chance of having their own home. Chair, I'm incredibly pleased to report that on that last aspiration, we've made real strides in the right direction. Figures released on Monday show that in London, we not only have met but exceeded the target set by government. Over 116,000 new genuinely affordable homes have been started since 2015-16, including a record-breaking 25,000 in the last year alone. We're also breaking records on homes completed. This means first-time buyers will be able to get on the housing ladder and families can put down roots. I'm acutely aware that we have much more to do to solve the housing crisis, and I'll continue to call on the government to give me the powers to freeze rents, but it's with great pride that I can say London is building again. And can I once again pay tribute to the Deputy Mayor Tom Copley, the staff here at City Hall, our councils, housing associations and developers for their incredible work. Chair, as you said at the beginning, I've had one request for an oral update, and that's from Senator Caroline Russell on coronation policing. I want to start by reiterating my thanks to the Commissioner and the many thousands of dedicated officers, police staff and volunteers who worked over the weekend of the King's coronation. This was the largest security operation the Metropolitan Police has ever led, and they deserve huge credit for ensuring the safety and security of the public during this incredibly complex and fast-moving event. 64 arrests were made relating to the coronation on the 6th of May. 42 individuals have been bailed pending further investigations. At 6:40 a.m. on the 6th of May, 6 protesters from Republic were arrested at St Martin's Lane on suspicion of going equipped for locking on. They were bailed later that day. On the 8th of May, their bail was cancelled and no further action will be taken. At around 2 a.m. on the 6th of May, 3 people who were Westminster City Council volunteers were arrested in Soho on suspicion of conspiracy to commit public nuisance. They were released later that day and no further action will be taken. At approximately 9:15 a.m. on the 6th of May, officers challenged and arrested 6 people on Whitehall on suspicion of conspiracy to cause a public nuisance, all of whom have been bailed pending investigation. During the arrest, an individual who had been observed as part of this group identified as a journalist and displayed a form of union accreditation to officers. The investigation continues and will review the evidence and circumstances of this arrest. 28 Just Stop Oil protesters were arrested at the coronation after the Met Police Service received intelligence about planned disruption on the route. Some Met Police Service activity gave rise to concerns. I was in contact with senior members of the Met Police Service over the weekend, and I wrote to the Commissioner on the 9th of May to seek assurances. The Commissioner has responded, and both of our letters have been published online. So Mark has provided assurances that an operational review of this activity will be undertaken and any lessons learned will be reflected in future planning. I'm clear that the findings from this operational review should be made public.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that update. I just want to pick up briefly on the arrest of a journalist reporting on protests, because that's something that we discussed back in December last year. So it is worrying to hear that a journalist was arrested while reporting on a protest. But I think the thing that people have told me they're worried about is that the police seem to be taking an arrest and ask questions later approach that day. Do you think that's acceptable?
I wouldn't accept that description of police activity. Yes, there are questions in relation to that particular journalist, and I've explained in my answer the police investigation. As you said, a freelance journalist was arrested at the coronation. He was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to cause a public nuisance. The 22 Act, that's been looked into. I'm quite clear. There were fast-moving things happening during the course of that night. Sometimes intelligence is imperfect. Sometimes the police can, in good faith, make an arrest and have reasonable suspicion. and it later transpires the person they arrested has committed no criminal offence. And you wouldn't expect, actually, for every single person the police to arrest to be subsequently charged. And the good news in relation to the Republic protesters was, as the leader has said, there was an apology from the police because, the police realised that those people arrested hadn't committed a criminal offence.
Mr. Mayor, it's really worrying that those 8 protesters from Republic were arrested and then bailed, and you said that bail, it was all cancelled and no further action. Same happening for the the Night Stars volunteers. This is people being locked up for the duration of the event, and actually it turns out that there was, these are people who'd been engaging with the police. There was. It's really chilling for people who want to protest in London, and that is a human right. It is part of our culture in London to go to peaceful protests, and these are people who were locked up for about 16 hours. It's a traumatic experience being arrested and locked up, and it is really worrying to hear that that has been happening on our streets in London. Did you get any impression from the briefings you had beforehand that there was going to be this approach of locking people up for such long periods with such low tolerance?
Well, it's because there were concerns raised that I wrote to the Commissioner, and both the Commissioner and I have made our letters public to reassure the public in relation to the police's response and the questions that I have clearly. Not only is it in our culture to protest, it's enshrined in legislation. Article 10 is quite clear of the Human Rights Act in relation to the right to protest, and that includes protesting when it's not the most popular issue in the world, by the way. And nobody's suggesting, and certainly the police aren't, that you can suspend the right to protest when there is a coronation, and there was lots of protests taking place over that weekend. I think the issue is if there are lessons to be learned in relation to the 2 new acts, the 23 Act and the 22 Act in particular, and that's why I've asked the Commissioner for the operational review to be made public so the public can be reassured that any lessons that can be learned should be learned.
I'm glad that that's going to be made public. Now, I want to pick up on the Westminster City Council Night Stars volunteers, because that was a really shocking episode. When you asked the Commissioner what briefing there was for officers about the local partnerships, he said the briefings would not include local matters like the deployment of Night Star volunteers. But yesterday at the Home Affairs Select Committee, Susie Melvin, one of those Night Stars volunteers who was arrested, said that the officer who arrested her said they were specifically looking for the Night Stars volunteers. So it sounds like the Night Stars volunteers were being targeted. If the Met say they were not briefed on the Night Stars and yet they were still looking for them on the night, that just feels really worrying. Are you satisfied with the Commissioner's explanation about the Night Stars and their arrest in his letter?
I think there's a difference of versions from Westminster and the volunteers and the police, and I think the temporary Assistant Commissioner Twist has agreed to meet with the volunteers and the council to resolve the issue of the difference of versions, because you're right, there does appear to be different versions coming from the police, the volunteers and the council.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think the offer from AC Twist is a sensible one, and I hope they will meet to discuss this.
I hope they'll do more than just discuss it. I hope they'll learn some lessons from it, because, I mean, the person giving evidence yesterday, she would have known that the police will have body-worn video of the interaction. She won't have made up what she gave in evidence yesterday. I just finally want to ask whether you are going to lobby the government to repeal this new legislation. You've mentioned that you're concerned about the new legislation, particularly the Public Order Act. Are you going to lobby to try and get that repealed?
No, there are parts of the legislation that I support, particularly in relation to national infrastructure. I'm concerned about Section 2. I'm concerned about the lock-on provisions. The definition of what a lock-on equipment is. You'll have seen the confusion in relation to the public not understanding what is deemed to be lock-on and not, particularly when it relates to going equipped to lock-on. I think it's important for the police to undertake a proper debrief of what happened this weekend, an operational review. You'll be aware the first time the 23 legislation was used was at the coronation, and it's really important that lessons are learned because you'll be aware some of those against whom there was no further action the concern was they had going equipped to lock on. So there are questions in relation to Section 2 in the definition.
I think, Mr. Mayor, there are huge questions about what going equipped to lock on actually means, but I'm going to leave my questions there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to the questions on the priority order paper. Each group on the Assembly is allocated an amount of time to ask their questions that is proportionate to their size. The first question is number 1600, and it concerns floating bus stops, from Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair. I want all of London's infrastructure to be as safe as possible for all road users. I've asked TfL to review the data on collisions around bus stop bypasses to evaluate if any changes should be considered. It is generally understood in transport systems across the country and around the world that bus stop bypasses are the safest way to segregate cyclists and road traffic in many locations. They can create safe, attractive cycling facilities alongside bus stops and are included in the Department for Transport's national guidance updated by the government in 2020. Research shows that segregated cycle lanes mean people who feel uncomfortable cycling in traffic are much more likely to make cycle journeys. This helps to broaden the demographic of Londoners who cycle, to include more women and children and elderly and disabled people, all groups who are underrepresented among London's cyclists, but who find the benefits of cycling once they're confident to try it. TfL has already taken steps to mitigate the risk of conflict between cyclists and pedestrians. Measures such as zebra crossing points and tactile paving help to ensure both bus users and cyclists know what is expected. TfL undertakes an equality impact assessment before introducing a scheme and uses the same process to inform the life cycle of a scheme. I recognise some concerns have been raised about bus stop bypasses, and I want to see a street network that is as inclusive as possible for all ages and abilities, including for pedestrians and those who may be more vulnerable. TfL's review will look into detail at the equality implications of these facilities and whether mitigations should be required. It will conduct video surveys, examine how customers use bus stop bypasses, and consider feedback from pedestrian, cycling and disabled people's organisations. This will include those representing people with visual impairments who we know have some specific concerns, to ensure their views are understood. I've also asked TfL to engage through forums such as the GLA's Deaf and Disabled Persons Organisation Forum to ensure a range of views are heard. TfL will use the findings to consider how the design of bus stop bypasses could evolve, taking into account the characteristics of specific locations. TfL will also look at any behaviour change measures that may be needed to ensure that everyone can use bus stop bypasses with confidence. The Department for Transport and Transport Scotland have also funded a research project looking at the inclusiveness of bus stop bypasses and continuous footways led by Living Streets. The report is expected later this year, and TfL will also consider this as part of their work.
Do you want me to? Oh, yeah. Okay. Pause the clock, or? All right. Sorry, I'd just like to thank members of NFB UK for coming out today. They've got a very busy day there at the BBC and Parliament. So, unfortunately, we don't have Nellie the dog, but we do have some members of the organisation. So, thank you to them for joining us again, Mr. Mayor. On the 15th of February on Eddie Nestor's radio show, you said in response to a request to meet with the National Federation of Blind UK to have a meeting about asking for a meeting on floating bus stops, you said, of course I'm happy to meet you. Let's organise that on that very public show. They did chase that meeting, and finally on the 6th of April received a letter from your Deputy Mayor Seb Dance saying the Mayor cannot accommodate a meeting with you. Would you like to keep your word and review that and make time to have a meeting with the organisation?
I think the Walking and Cycling Commissioner, Will Norman, and the Deputy Mayor Seb Dance have met with the National Federation, but there's separate groups who are also meeting with the RNIB, Guide Dogs, Action on Hearing Loss. They're all on the Society for Blind Children. And I think the point that Seb and Will made the last time they met the National Federation was, once there's more information in the review, that may be a good time to have a further meeting with this group, but also other groups as well.
Mr. Mayor, that wasn't the question, and you may realise you aren't Seb Dance and you aren't Will Norman, so you are the Mayor of London, and they asked to have a meeting with the Mayor of London, and the Mayor of London said, of course, I'm happy to meet with you, let's organise that. That was who the meeting was with. And you later said to them, finally, on the 6th of April, the Mayor cannot accommodate a meeting. I'm asking you, would you like to look at that again, and will you make time for them, given that you so publicly said that you would?
I'm more than happy to meet the National Federation and other groups who I do regularly. The point about meeting the specialists in this area is they can answer the questions the group may have, but I'm more than happy to meet with the National Federation in relation to any issues they have. It may make more sense to meet with them once the review's further down the road, but I'm more than happy to meet with them and other groups.
Thank you, Ms Smith. So just to confirm, because I don't want to get into a position where I'm then reading this question out to you sometime in later in the year, and you've again said, actually, I'm not going to meet with them, but you are definitely going to meet with them this time.
If the group would prefer to meet with me rather than the expert specialist dealing with this, then I'm more than happy to meet with them. Just worth saying that on the working group, looking into this review, are a number of other specialist groups as well. So just to reassure the National Federation, there are other groups also that we're working closely with.
Thank you. And just looking at that collision data, and I've actually had this conversation with Will Norman as well, we know that a lot of this won't come from collision data, right? It's about near misses, it's about people that aren't getting seriously hurt and aren't reporting it. That is going to be the number that's going to be the number of incidents. And actually, if you look at the data is going to tell you something quite shocking, that every time there's a collision, it's really serious and people get hurt, because those are the ones that are reported. So what they've agreed to, and I'm hoping you'll say you'll agree, is that monitoring should be through some video footage of those sites and observing creating that data set from what is happening in real time, as opposed to looking at past reports. Is that something that you'd agree to?
Yeah, I think one of the concerns both pedestrians concerned about cyclists, particularly those visually impaired, have, as well as actually cyclists worried about lorries and buses, is the near misses, as you referred to. So often, if you're just hit on the shoulder, for example, by a cyclist, you may not report it, but that is quite distressing to you. And so the video surveys idea is one way to incorporate the incidents that aren't recorded on the stats. And this applies to cyclists as well in relation to bus collision and HGV collisions. Short of a collision and injury, there are many cyclists, I'm sure you've spoken to many, who also have incidents that are recorded as collisions or serious injuries, but are quite serious. So the video surveys is one way to incorporate the pedestrian cyclist situation. We're also clearly looking at what we can do to include experiences of cyclists in relation to where there have been these floating bus stops.
Thank you. And I'll just be really quick on this last one. Hopefully you can agree with this. There has been talk as well of running an enforcement campaign. There's some really good enforcement campaigns that work in partnership with charities at the moment, whereby you see cyclists going on the pavement, they go and have a chat and see why that was a bad thing to do, and what the effect could be. Over summer, as more people begin to cycle and make use of the sunshine, will you commit to there being an enforcement campaign like that at floating bus stops and bus stop bypasses this summer?
One of the things the review is looking into is the issue of enforcement. I think much of the review will be finished by this summer. The issue with this summer is that's not typical in relation to people using buses. You imagine schools closed for summer and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why, for example, the video surveys, if you did it just over summer, there won't be reflective of what happens during the course of the year. But enforcement is one of the issues that the review is looking into, and I can come back to the Assembly in relation to the review when it's done later on this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question concerns fossil fuel-powered private jets, and it comes from Assembly Member Polanski.
Morning. We are in a climate emergency, and people are more aware of the need to consider the flights they take and opt for low-carbon alternatives if they can. Every sector of the economy must cut its emissions if climate catastrophe is to be averted. Aviation is no exception. In fact, it's high-emitting sectors like this that must be making the biggest changes. A recent study estimated that private jets are 5 to 14 times more polluting than commercial planes per passenger and 50 times more polluting than trains. They are also used by an incredibly small number of people, usually the most privileged people in our society. Those users are in a position to make choices for or against our planet. I was surprised that the Prime Minister took private jet trips costing the taxpayer almost £500,000 in just over a week last year, churning out toxic emissions. Last week he took a private helicopter to Southampton and back to visit a pharmacy, a journey that would have taken him an hour and 15 minutes each way by train. This is not the action of a net zero leader. The UK tops the league table for private jet journeys in Europe, with a flight taken off every 6 minutes in 2022. These private jets are the preserve of the super rich and have increased in numbers in recent years. This needs to be rapidly reduced if we're serious about tackling climate change. Frequent air travellers should consider firstly whether a particular journey is needed at all, and if so, to take the lowest carbon options wherever possible. In Europe, high-speed train connections exist on 70 to 80% of the top 10 most popular private jet routes. While I have no powers to regulate private jets or air travel more generally, I can and have objected to expansion at London's airports, as it would increase the number of flights at a time when we should be encouraging people to take more sustainable alternatives. For private jet users, including the Prime Minister, there are always lower carbon alternatives. If he feels those alternatives are not acceptable, he's in the fortunate position to be able to fund the infrastructure needed to get people where they want to go in a more sustainable way.
Thank you. London is Europe's private jet capital, and these are really bad both for air pollution and for carbon emissions. In fact, if someone flies to the south of France and back on a return trip, they are emitting more carbon, or can be emitting more carbon, than an average Londoner in an entire year. Now, 17,000 private jets landed in the GLA area, took off and landed in the GLA area last year alone, so that's not even including Gatwick, Stansted and Luton. Now, I've heard you condemn the Prime Minister, and I agree with that entirely, but would you condemn all private jet use?
Just to amplify your point, of the most popular routes in Europe, the three most popular all fly from London. One to Paris, one to Nice, one to Geneva. Look, I accept there may be circumstances where somebody may need to use a private jet, but the point I said in my substantive answer remains. There are alternatives available, including commercial flights, and people should consider the alternatives, particularly when we know the carbon footprint of private jets is so much greater than commercial lines and other alternatives as well.
Can I ask you for an example of where someone should be using a private jet?
A private jet to London to Paris. The Eurostar is fantastic. Other brands aren't available, I'm afraid, in relation to trains. But London to Paris is a good example where actually, by the time you've got to the airport, they do tend to be outside London, by the way, the Stansteds, the Lutons and so forth. Get into King's Cross, jump on the train, get into Paris is probably quicker, as well as less carbon footprint than taking your private jet from London to Paris.
So 1% of aviation, 1% of the people are doing over 50% of the global aviation emissions. So can I just absolutely clarify, you do condemn all private jet use?
No, I think I just said I can appreciate there may be exceptional circumstances.
What would be an exceptional circumstance? I mean, if we're condemning the Prime Minister, that's a fairly important job, and I agree with that. What would be the exceptional circumstance where someone needs to take a private jet rather than take the Eurostar, for example?
Well, there could be exceptional circumstances because of a time of day where the person's got to get to a destination for something that can't be met by commercial airline.
So the time of day is more important than the climate emergency?
Well, we're given hypotheticals, for example.
Well, no, it's not hypothetical. Yesterday, the scientists said that we're going to breach 1.5 degrees. That's not hypothetical. So why should anyone be using a private jet use when we're in a climate emergency? And we're rightly asking people to change their travelling habits in London. Should we not be asking the super rich to change their habits and not use private jets?
Yeah. I think the question is, am I in favour of banning private jets? And the answer is no. What I'm saying is there are nearly always alternatives, but I can envisage a scenario where there may not be an alternative to a private jet. It should be exceptional, but I'm not in favour, as indeed you are, of closing airports down and banning private jets.
I'm very clear that we need a just transition around aviation, but this isn't even about airports. This is about the wealthiest 1%. Now, Mr. Mayor, you do lots of measures around tackling poverty, and I support those. Free school meals, for instance, excellent. But you very rarely talk about tackling the wealthiest and the richest. We're in a cost of living crisis. It should not be difficult for a Labour mayor to say, I condemn the use of all private jets. Why won't you do that?
I've been quite clear in my answer. I'm happy to read it out again in relation to my views on the use of private jets, what I'm unwilling to do.
I think you've been very clear that you stand with the 1%, Mr. Mayor.
What I'm very willing to do is to explain why I think private jets shouldn't be used where there's alternatives. And clearly, from the answer I gave, there are lots of alternatives to private jets. I've even gone as far as to talk about the difference between using a private jet in relation to carbon footprint and using a commercial airline. I'm not in the same place as you are, and I respect your views, which is to close all airports down and ban private jets.
That is not my view, but I would ban private jets within a second. I've heard you very clear. The answer is very clear. The 99% of Londoners will have heard the Mayor's answer very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question concerns the cost of food crisis, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Ahmad.
Thank you, Chair. Food price rises have put huge pressure on Londoners' budgets, especially low-income Londoners who have to spend a higher proportion of their income on food. In the last few months, food banks have seen falling donations. rising energy costs and consistently high demand, while being affected by price rises themselves. In response, with limited resources and powers, we're working to both help Londoners struggling to afford food right now and support food aid providers and local community organisations to reduce the need for crisis provision. I've committed £130 million in emergency funding to ensure every primary pupil in the capital receives free school meals. This could save families around £440 per child, ensuring parents aren't worrying about how they're going to feed their children. It will also guarantee every primary school child a healthy, nutritious meal, meaning they don't go hungry in the classroom and can better concentrate on their studies. Hunger doesn't stop at the end of the term, which is why I've also launched a free holiday meals programme to support families during the school holidays. Over Easter, more than 550,000 free holiday meals were given to low-income families struggling with spiralling costs. In total, our partnership with the Felix Project and Mayor's Fund for London will help provide 10 million meals over the next year via community partners, including charities, schools and grassroots organisations. At the same time, my Food Routes programme is supporting resilient and sustainable approaches to addressing food insecurity. Our Food Routes programme has provided short-term capacity grants for food partnerships in 30 London boroughs to boost their work in the face of acute capacity constraints caused by the cost of living crisis. The next phase of the programme will launch soon, but households should not need to depend on emergency food provision to survive. The drivers of food insecurity must be addressed, and in London, food insecurity is overwhelmingly caused by incomes being too low to afford the basics. I'm calling on the government to intervene by increasing benefits while people are struggling and removing the two-child limit, funding universal free school meals and introducing a lifeline energy tariff for vulnerable households.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, the Resolution Foundation has said that food prices are the new energy bills when it comes to how people are experiencing the cost of living crisis. You will be aware of the shocking news that the cost of infant formula, baby milk, is now sky high, with parents having to take extreme measures to feed their babies, including watering down foods, substituting formula with condensed milk, and stealing baby milk from shops. Experts say that the government needs to make staples such as fruit and vegetables much cheaper and increase the value of the Healthy Start vouchers because we are on the brink of a public health crisis. Given that Londoners are disproportionately affected in the figures of poverty, do you agree with the experts, Mr Mayor?
I do, but it's just worth reminding colleagues that food prices have gone up by more than 20%. We're also concerned about the issues around obesity, and often fresh fruit and produce is more expensive than the processed stuff that's less good for families. You can often get, chicken and chips for £1. You get a family of 3; it's a cheaper option than alternative. So the point I'm making is that yes, of course, I agree with the analysis you set up, but there are unintended consequences by this food poverty we're seeing. That's why it's really important. If we address this, we also solve a number of other issues. If we don't, a number of other issues are exacerbated.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, you have talked about the emergency funding that you will make available from September for universal free school meals. Could you talk about any future plans to extend that?
Yes, so we're working with schools, councils and others to make sure that we're ready to go for the start of the next academic term for free universal primary school meals. We've not waited, though, in relation to the holiday provision I mentioned in my answer. So I visited in Ealing, I beg your pardon, House and Fulham, one of the community organisations who are helping children during the holidays have access to food. There'll be 10 million meals provided over the course of the next year. At the same time, we are giving financial support to law centres and advice centres. Often people are eligible for benefits. They're not claiming for what they're eligible for. So we're making sure that families who are eligible for benefits can do so. At the same time, we're also funding warmer home grants for those whose bills are huge because of lack of insulation and so forth. So £8 million going towards supporting low-income families across our city, £130 million going towards free school meals, other provision being provided, and that's with the limited resources and powers we have. The only person really who can really solve this meaningfully is the government, but I'm afraid from the Prime Minister's comments overnight about him thinking that families have now, overall disposable income is better than expectation. It shows how out of touch he is.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. The next question concerns Met Police performance, and it comes from Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you for your question. I asked for the independent review to be conducted by Baroness Louise Casey because I was deeply concerned about cultural issues and systemic failings within the Met Police Service. The evidence from that review is damning. Baroness Casey found institutional racism, institutional misogyny and institutional homophobia, which I accept. She described the Met Police Service as defensive, resistant to change and unwilling to engage with communities. Baroness Casey also concluded the Met Police Service transparency and accountability to Londoners should be strengthened. She recommended that a new quarterly board be established to oversee the transformation of the MPS while maintaining the operational independence of the Commissioner. I've accepted all Baroness Casey's findings and recommendations and we're moving forward with the establishment of the London Policing Board. Building on Baroness Casey's recommendation that the board should be similar to the model now used for Transport for London, the London Policing Board will be public-facing and I'll chair it personally. It will convene a range of experts reflective of London's diverse population to provide specialist advice to help deliver real and sustainable improvements across the MPS, including wide-ranging cultural reform. The board will support the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime in holding the Met Police Service to account as part of our wider strategic oversight framework in line with MOPAC's statutory duties under the Police Reform Act 2011. Officials are working at pace to ensure the London Policing Board is up and running as soon as possible. This includes working with TfL colleagues to understand their experiences of the TfL board and adopting best practice ideas to ensure the successful operation of the London Policing Board. Baroness Casey's findings reveal serious failings in the MPS that must be addressed with far-reaching structural and cultural reforms of urgency. I'm unflinching in my resolve to support and hold the MPS to account, and the London Policing Board will provide a forum for openness and transparency as we take that work forward. I won't be satisfied until Londoners have the police service they deserve, one that's trusted and representative and which delivers the highest possible service to every community in our city as we work to build a safer London for everyone.
Lovely, thank you. When we've talked before, you've placed a lot on the shoulders of the new Met Commissioner, being willing to listen and to be open. And yet just last week we hear again from Her Majesty's Inspector that unsuitable candidates are being recruited. We also heard about new files relating to the Daniel Morgan case having been found in a locked cupboard at Scotland Yard. You were only told about that around 4 months after that discovery. So how are you going to ensure that you have a grip on everything that is going on in the Met Police?
So the HMI report into vetting was a national report, not just a Met Police Service report, and we've said for some time that actually it's far too easy to become a police officer, far too difficult to get rid of police officers. So me personally, working with parliamentarians in relation to the legislation needed to change the law in relation to vetting. It requires a primary act of Parliament, and so we're working with colleagues in Parliament to get that going. In the meantime, we've not waited, so City Hall have given more money to the Met Police Service to improve the vetting processes. That includes, for example, the anti-abuse corruption hotline. That includes, for example, more officers supporting the domestic abuse sexual offences unit and the hotline. At the same time, to improve recruitment, what we've done from City Hall is invest.
How are you going to get a grip on everything that's going on? I absolutely accept you've got those work programmes, but, you know, Morgan stuff coming out, you were shocked by that, you said that. How are you going to ensure that you really have oversight of everything that's going on?
Well, let's use the Morgan example, just to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge the new Commissioner and I have, which is the documents in relation to Morgan were found in a filing cabinet locked away. And unless you're suggesting I go to every police station and property and unlock cabinets, we've got to be realistic about that. And we've got to trust the Commissioner, and I do trust the Commissioner, when the Commissioner says he's trying to get a grip on these issues. I think the Policing Board is a good example of the public-facing work that's required, but also something that you've raised in the past is outside expertise. And the Policing Board will have the outside expertise because, I'll give you an example, cultural reform. Question, is there the expertise inside Met Police Service or City Hall to undertake a programme of cultural reform? Answer, probably not. And that's why you'd expect somebody of the board to have that sort of expertise and background. There are other examples I can give to you, but that's one of the points that Dame Louise Casey made about how TfL is very different from the Met Police Service Management Board.
And what changes to policing in London do you expect to see in a year's time?
I think both the Commissioner and I have said, I mean, I've taken my lead from the Commissioner. He thinks it'll take 2 years to see, you said 1 year, it'll take 2 years to see a meaningful change in relation to what we hope to see. But in the first 6 months, you've seen some of the progress, speeding up processes around discipline, really important just in the first 6 months being achieved. More officers have been removed from the police service in the first 6 months than any 6 month period in recent past. I think a big change that I was referring to, but understandably you interrupted me, was in relation to getting people from the community to help the training of police officers when they first come in, because often we're taking police candidates who don't live in London, and their experiences of London is very different. And so that community work is very important at the inception and then going on during the police officer's career.
I think what you're saying, there sounds some really positive steps, but this new board, quarterly, you said it's going to meet, you're going to chair, is at a crucial turning point around the Met Police and rebuilding trust in Londoners. And Londoners need to see you stepping up in this area, I think, being more visible. And we need to see those visible, measurable changes to protect policing by consent. So what metrics will you put in place in order that we can measure your performance as London's Police and Crime Commissioner?
Well, one of the things that we did with the TfL board when I took over was to look at the effectiveness of the board, and one of the things that the team at MOPAC are doing in speaking to TfL is to learn from TfL's experience when I took over about board effectiveness. And so we bring into the policing board some of those lessons we've learned. So one of the things we do, for example, with TfL is get an outside body to measure how effective the TfL board has been, both the NEDs and the executive team. And so that's not been decided yet, because we've got to consult, obviously, the new members of the board. I don't want to dictate to the board the metrics, but that gives you a flavour of some of the outside marking of homework I want to see in relation to the policing board.
Well, I look forward to seeing that so we can assess your performance and the new board's performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, North Beckton Primary School are in the house, and you're welcome to come and see what we're doing here. The next question to be asked is concerning overcrowding, and it comes from Assembly Member Moema.
Can I say how lovely it is to see people here my size? So you're most welcome. All Londoners must have access to suitable, safe and decent housing. It's vital for health and well-being. I share the National Housing Federation's concern at the levels of overcrowding in London. According to the ONS, London has the highest proportion of households in England with fewer bedrooms than required. Around 8% of London's households overcrowded. Social rented housing has the highest proportion of households in overcrowded conditions. This problem is caused by an undersupply of affordable homes that meet the needs of Londoners. This week, I announced that City Hall funded a record-breaking number of affordable homes last year and hit the ambitious target set by the government for my Affordable Homes Programme 2016 to 2023. The government target was for us to start 116,000 genuinely affordable homes by April 2023. Despite huge challenges, the hard work of our partners and my housing team has meant that's exactly what we've done. This month, I also celebrated his now target to start building 20,000 council homes in London by 2024, a whole year early. Deputy Mayor Tom Copley and I went to see some of these new council homes in Brent, where we met a family of 6 who lived for 14 years in an overcrowded 2-bedroom flat. They've now moved into a new home in a street of brand new 4-bedroom houses, part funded by City Hall. Through work like this, we're delivering the homes needed to ease overcrowding in London. I'm also ensuring that the market delivers affordable homes through the planning system. Record levels of affordable housing were secured in strategic schemes I approved in 2022, 41% compared to 22% in 2016. And I'll continue to help build the homes Londoners need through my 2023 to 2026 Affordable Homes Programme. The new programme prioritises homes at social rent, which is the most affordable and most urgently needed type of housing. But it's vital that the government increases the funding available to me if we're going to continue record-breaking levels of building and create the homes Londoners desperately need. London requires £4.9 billion annually to meet the need, compared to the £800 million we currently receive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I also add to your congratulations to the team and to Deputy Mayor Copley for the amazing smashing of the target of 116,000 homes. And you know, there were people in this chamber who said that it wasn't possible to do, and I'm really glad that we've done it. To quote Lisa Nandy, there is no way out of the housing crisis without building more homes. But my question really on that, obviously one of the issues that is a consequence of not having adequate numbers of social and affordable housing is the number of children living in overcrowded accommodation. We saw through COVID the impact of that on people's mental well-being, educational attainment, and so on. And I just wondered what work it was possible from City Hall, perhaps in partnership with others, that could be done to help alleviate some of those problems.
Yeah, it's a really important point you raised. So just to give you an idea not just of starts, but in relation to completions. When I first became mayor, only about 30% of homes completed in our city were 3-bedroom plus. Now it's north of 40%. So we're building more family homes as well, which is really important for the reasons you suggest, and they're completed homes, by the way. So the big challenges with the consequences of overcrowding on children, mental health issues, lack of development, educational attainment, and so forth. I've got to be frank, though. For the foreseeable future, we simply aren't going to have the supply of homes to meet the demand. I gave you an example the other day of a family Tom and I met, 14 years in temporary accommodation, chronic overcrowding. We met another family, 20 years in temporary accommodation. So the legacy issues ongoing, and plus people having families still. So that's one of the reasons why we're lobbying for regulation of the private rental sector. So I'm really pleased with the announcement yesterday in relation to no-fault evictions. That deals with the issue of security, not about cost. And so it's still possible for a landlord to increase the rents, which forces somebody to leave because they can't afford the rent. It's not no-fault eviction, and that's a big challenge. So in the short to medium term, what we're doing, Sam, is to lobby the government for amendments in the rental reform bill to include issues around rent freezes and stabilising the rents in London.
Okay, and on that, I completely agree. If we're looking at a maximum amount of £23,500 in universal credit to a household, that doesn't even cover the rent for a two-bedroom flat for 1 year, let alone the amount of space that a family would need. And so I know that you have made, and I have become a bit of a squeaky wheel about the commission, which we need powers devolved from government to put in place to work with both tenants and landlords to set in place as London-specific rent control. It'd be really good to hear how that would work in the context of the announcement yesterday, and if that is something that you're also asking the government to do alongside those amendments.
So one of the things that we know in Scotland that happened was in Scotland those campaigners, activists, the Labour Party and others managed to persuade the Scottish government to freeze rents last winter, first for 6 months, and they've now extended it to have a cap of no higher than 3%. So it can work in this country, right? Edinburgh, Glasgow have seen big increases, and it's really helped those families. And so we still seek to lobby the government. The bill has a long way to go before it's an act of Parliament. With a good win by the end of this year, it's going to be very tough. And so we'll carry on lobbying the government, and hopefully it's an issue of cross-party support in relation to this issue. By the way, it's not just the London issue. The average cost of renting outside London has now gone above £1,000 for the first time ever. So I'm hoping we get allies across the country also agreeable to the idea of devolving to different cities and regions. Look, what's relevant to London may not be relevant to Burnley, right? And so devolving to cities and regions the power to look into the issue of rent freezes and stabilising rent controls, and working with landlords to get there.
Assembly Member Best.
I feel like I'm at a press conference now. Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, Mr. Mayor, 18% of the affordable housing starts last year were family homes, only 18%. Clearly, that's not going to meet the need to support overcrowded homes. Will you look urgently to make sure that percentage increases when we look at these stats next year?
I don't recognise that figure. As I said, on completions, it's north of 40%.
Sorry, it's I said 18% of starts this year.
Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry, beg your pardon. Sorry. Sorry, I blame the microphone. Yeah, no. So what we've done is, as part of the London plan, we've given each local authority a requirement to make sure they look at the need in their boroughs. And so we are working with council to increase the number of family-sized homes for the reasons that have been suggested by Assembly Member Moema. And so I'm happy to report back at a later stage in relation to where we are in relation to progress made. But it's right that we need to have all sorts of units of homes in London, and that includes family homes. For the obvious reason, the only way a family can afford a home in London that's the right size is through affordable housing, because the average cost of a terraced home to buy is now £850,000 in London. So this will be the only route for a family to get out of overcrowded accommodation to one that's got the right size.
Thank you. We don't need any review. We don't need any stats to tell you that 18% does not meet the need for family-sized homes in London of affordable homes. So I just hope that next year, when we look at these stats, that they are above 18%. Thank you.
Well, in answer to that question, Chair, the key thing is to make sure that...
All right. So, fair enough. The next question is now being asked by Assembly Member Hall, and it concerns the ULEZ expansion update.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm assuming this is a question rather than a statement. TfL is on track to deliver the expansion of ULEZ London-wide on the 29th of August. With air pollution contributing to around 4,000 Londoners dying prematurely each year, children growing up with stunted lungs and a higher risk of dementia in older people, it's now essential that the ULEZ is expanded. This is also a matter of social justice. London's poorest households are least likely to own a car in outer London. 70% of households that earn less than £10,000 actually don't own a car. But poorer households are more likely to be affected by the impacts of toxic air caused by traffic and congestion. Londoners are already preparing for the expansion and switching from older, more polluting vehicles. Data shows that 9 out of 10 cars seen driving in outer London on an average day already meet the ULEZ standards. This is up from 85% in November 2021 and 75% in June 2020. TfL's Check Your Vehicle tool, where drivers can find out if their vehicle meets ULEZ standards, has been visited more than 6 million times since November 2022, when I made the decision to expand the ULEZ. Over £20 million of my £110 million scrappage scheme has already been allocated to lower income and disabled Londoners and to London's small businesses, sole traders and charities. Thousands of applications have been approved so far, helping drivers across the capital transition to greener transport options. TfL is undertaking an extensive multi-channel marketing campaign to raise awareness of the expansion amongst Londoners and home counties drivers. Activities running across traditional media like TV, radio and local and national press. It's also running at more targeted locations like roadside posters, screens in motorway service stations, petrol pump nozzles and on Waze, a wayfinding app. TfL is also distributing leaflets in high footfall locations like shopping centres and sending letters to the owners of non-compliant vehicles via the DVLA. This sits alongside engagement with key stakeholders to raise further awareness of the expansion and provide any information that their communities might require to prepare for the expansion. Expanding the ULEZ London-wide is a crucial part of ensuring a greener, healthier and fairer future for London. The expansion of the ULEZ on the 29th of August is a critical element of London's fight against the triple challenges of air pollution, the climate emergency and congestion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The last MQT, you said 9 out of 10 of those households in outer London who have a car are compliant. Was that statement accurate?
Yeah, the figure comes from analysis of the data from existing ANPR cameras and is representative of circulating traffic in the area, the vehicles that will be impacted by the expansion. And those figures from late last year shows 9 out of 10 cars and nearly 8 out of 10 vans seen driving in outer London on an average day are ULEZ compliant.
Yeah, OK. So you've corrected your terminology this time by using the term seen driving. That is not what you said last time. So your statement before, when you did not mention seen driving, was inaccurate, wasn't it?
I'm quite clear what the data is. It's monitored through the automatic number plate recognition data derived from anonymised daily camera operations.
Mr. Mayor, are you incapable of saying, yes, I was incorrect on my statement and I apologise, I should have said seen driving, because it gives the wrong impression, doesn't it?
I'm quite clear on what the data says, which is what I've read out, Chair.
We're quite clear, and we're quite clear that you were inaccurate last time. And I like to see that today you have actually given the SMMT proper figures out. Has anybody asked you for these figures before?
Asked me personally for these figures before.
Asked your office for information on the SMMT, which for anybody watching is a Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders.
I'm not sure where, Chair. My office probably gets lots of requests all the time.
I'm sure they do, and I'm sure you're selective on who you answer. So you don't want to correct the statement then that you made last time, i.e. that you were incorrect?
No, Chair, I'm quite clear what I've read out. I'm happy to read it out again if that helps.
No, it's a waste of time because you won't accept that ever that you're wrong. In Harrow, the figures we had before was 74% of vehicles are non-compliant. We see the figures that have literally come out since we've all been sitting here. They're now at 83%. And my colleague, Assembly Member Garrett, will be interested to see that Sutton is also at 83%. That represents 16,000 vehicles These vehicles almost certainly belong to hard-working Londoners who do not have as much money as some. They are going to be put in a dire situation because of this. Do you accept that?
I accept there are some Londoners who've got non-compliant vehicles, which is why we have the biggest ever scrappage scheme our city or any part of the country has seen. £110 million available so far, around £2 million has been used, and I'd encourage anyone who's got a non-compliant vehicle to first check that it is non-compliant, and then if it's non-compliant, see if they're eligible for the scrappage scheme. At the same time, we're lobbying the government for more support towards a scrappage scheme as they've given to other parts of the country. We're hopeful the government will give us more support towards a scrappage scheme to help the sort of families that you're
Mr.
concerned
Mayor,
about.
you come out with comments and statistics that we now have to wonder if they're true, because clearly this was incorrect 2 months ago when you gave us the information of 9 in 10. You poo-poo it and say that it's hardly anybody that's going to be affected. In Harrow, 16,000 people will be affected. In Sutton, 16,000 people will be affected. And all the boroughs around. The amount of information and heart-rendering stories we're getting through the post show this is going to have a very detrimental effect on the poorest in our societies, hard-working Londoners. Do you not regret that at all?
Well, as I said in my original answer, Chair, it's those in outer London who suffer the worst consequences of air quality. It's those in outer London who suffer the most deaths attributable to air quality. They've not seen some of the benefits of the ULEZ in central London and London, which is why I want them to feel the benefits that we all feel.
You're repeating yourself, so I'll go on to a different point on this. So what are the ramifications of Surrey and other home counties, county councils refusing to allow any TfL ULEZ-related signage on their roads?
Well, it means people who live in the home counties who may not have a vehicle that's compliant won't be told that the ULEZ zone is about to come upon them when they drive in. And so it means that those residents won't realise that and may end up having to pay a fine because they've not paid the £12.50.
Okay, so what have you put in place? If July's judicial review determines that the ULEZ should not expand, have you determined how you're going to proceed?
No.
You haven't?
We're still moving ahead on the basis of the ULEZ being expanded at the end of August.
So if they're saying that it's incorrect, you're going to ignore that and go ahead anyway?
That wasn't the question you asked. The question you asked was...
No, I'm saying that now. Are you going to go ahead regardless?
No. I always follow the law, and I'm quite clear in relation to what we think is going to happen in the judicial review. Your question was, are we planning for losing the case? The answer is no. But if it's the case that the court finds against us, we'll consider that should it happen.
So you haven't got any plans if they do come out with that?
No, we're not expecting to lose the court case.
But surely you've got a plan in place. Surely. If they do come out with the fact that they don't think it should go ahead, what are you going to do about it? Well, you can't not have a plan. Even you, Mr. Mayor, must have a plan. Surely.
We do expect to have the ULEZ expanded at the end of August. 3 of the 5 grounds of judicial review were rejected by the court. 2 of the 5 grounds have been said to be arguable, so proceeding to the full hearing. We're confident we will win the case. We'll have to wait and see what the court decides.
Well, that confidence might make you look very stupid if they say you're not to proceed, and the fact that you haven't got a plan if they say that, I find extraordinary. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, is that a question or another statement?
It was another statement. Thank you very much.
Just got assembly statement time.
Time will tell what that was. Time will tell. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I do actually have a question, and I wondered if you saw the doctors and the other health workers. There was a lot of coverage. They decided to get on their bicycles to emphasise the expansion and how necessary they believe it to be. We know that the health service is under huge pressure, partly because of massive government underfunding of the surface. You mentioned stunted lungs, but I wondered if you could just outline some of the other health problems that will result from not expanding the ULEZ and what kind of pressures you think that would then put the London NHS under.
No, thanks for providing some balance to this debate. And it's just worth reminding ourselves, look, these are tough decisions. the decision to introduce the ULEZ, the decision to expand the ULEZ, the decision to expand it again. But it's, you know, when you've met a parent who's lost a child because of air pollution, or you meet a child who's having difficulty breathing because of stunted lungs, it has an impact on you. And what the evidence tells us, and I use the word evidence deliberately, so evidence, right, which is what some people try and avoid, is the evidence tells us that breathing in nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter on a regular basis means children's lungs are smaller forever. Forever. Once they're stunted, they can't grow back. And so that has an impact throughout the course of their life. And these doctors, they gain nothing by raising awareness of this issue, except fewer customers, fewer patients. They're raising awareness of this. And by the way, other experts, brackets, provided evidence, close brackets, from Imperial College, one of the world's finest universities, are quite clear about the benefits of the ultra-low emission zone. And, you know, it was a tough decision because I accept there are some people who have got real issues in relation to they're driving a vehicle, they need to drive a vehicle, and it's unfortunately not compliant. And that's why we've introduced first £61 million, now £110 million to support these families. But, you know, the worst thing of all when it comes to politics is misinformation, particularly when it comes to issues as important as issues as important as children's well-being. And, you know, people in the gallery, including us children, are watching. I'm being heckled talking about air quality and air pollution, and I apologise for the behaviour of
Assembly member.
Some members.
It's not your time to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that.
And now it is. Assembly Member Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, do you accept that on the latest figures out today, 16% of vehicles in outer London are not ULEZ compliant?
No, firstly, congratulations on the coup, on being the new leader of the Conservative.
It's these sort of comments, group. Mr. Mayor, are the reason why your friends and colleagues and people who work with you have such a warm opinion of you and your nature. If you could answer my question, though, and rather than make statements, I would appreciate that. Good. So do you accept that 16% of vehicles in outer London are non-compliant?
Well, I'm sorry that the member doesn't accept my congratulations. There you go. No, I don't accept the figures that referred to by the leader of the Conservative group. I'm quite clear in relation to TfL's always been consistent since 2017 in using figures from the automatic number plate recognition cameras. And from 2017, we've been comparing apples with apples rather than vehicles registered for a number of reasons. Vehicles registered is not an accurate reflection of information. Often cars are registered in one place but may be driven elsewhere. Often a car may not be used as well as people think it's going to be used. Often there are other exemptions available. For example, we've introduced schemes to do with exemptions and disability exemptions. So the most accurate data is the automatic number plate recognition data, and that shows in outer London more than 9 out of 10 vehicles are compliant. And that's gone up from what it was in previous years.
Okay, you don't accept that figure. That's fair enough. That is at least clear. So you present ULEZ. You've spoken at length this morning just now about why it's a positive change. Why is it, do you think, that so many of your own party colleagues aren't persuaded about the need to bring it in August?
Well, so in London, we've got, I think, 49 Labour MPs. I think 47 are publicly saying positive about this in London. We have 21 Labour councillors. I think all of them have been supportive of ULEZ. We have a number of members of the Assembly here who are Labour. I think all of them are supportive of ULEZ. I mean, and actually, to be fair, there are some Conservatives very supportive of ULEZ. The chair of the Climate Change Committee.
Sure. But look, this is your flagship policy, though, and you present the... When I'm interrupting because you're now changing the subject and not answering my question, which you have now answered. So you've accepted that, I mean, this is your flagship policy, and you present it as you have done this morning that, you know, why would anyone be against it? And yet some people in your own party are against it. Rachel Reeves, who's hoping to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, she was asked 4 times on LBC 2 weeks ago if she supported it, and she sort of treated it like a bad smell that she tried to waft away. Why is it, do you think, that she didn't enthusiastically endorse and support your flagship policy?
Well, can I suggest, Chair, I have far more support in my party than he does amongst his group of Assembly members, and my party is far more united than his party is, and so I'm quite comfortable with the support I've received from my
so
party.
why did you 4 times refuse to support your flagship policy, Mr Mayor?
I'm quite comfortable and grateful for the support I've received from my party nationally, regionally, and from those on the Assembly here.
So is it that you think that Rachel Reeves doesn't care about children's stunted lungs? Why did she 4 times refuse to endorse your policy? Well, she could have enthusiastically backed it. She could have been proud of it. Why do you think she didn't do that?
Well, I think I've been quite clear, Chair, that I'm really pleased for the support I've received from not just those colleagues here, but from the National Labour Party. I think most recently this week, Keir Starmer was on one of the radio stations and was incredibly supportive of this policy. So I'm quite clear. We've got support from not just the doctors referred to by a previous question, not just those.
If you'll forgive me, I sense that you are monologuing.
Politicians.
So Seema Malhotra said, "I'm very concerned about the economic impact the current rollout plans will have on residents and small businesses." You were earlier on this morning, in response to a different question, extremely eloquent about your concern about food poverty. What impact do you think your ULEZ expansion will have on food poverty?
But I agree with Seema in relation to the concerns that we both have in relation to the impact on small businesses, which is why we've set up a scrappage scheme of £110 million. And in fact, Seema is very supportive of our policy. What she wants to do, and I agree with her, is to get the government to give more support to small businesses, charities, low-income families, and so forth. I'm also quite clear the same families who are suffering from food poverty have children, some of whom with stunted lungs, children with asthma, but also their parents, when they're walking their kids to school, are breathing in the poison from these vehicles. Those children with food poverty, whose families earn less than £10,000, 7 out of 10 of those families in outer London don't own a car.
So 3 out of 10 do. And what impact do you think your ULEZ policy will have on food poverty?
I think what it will do, combined with the free school meals in September, lead to children being able to breathe cleaner air, lead to their parents having to take less time off work because of respiratory conditions, so if they're on 0 hours contract, earning more money. But the free school meals from September, which
okay, I didn't ask about free school meals. I asked about ULEZ. I asked about ULEZ. That's a different policy, Mr. Mayor. So it seems to me you have no sympathy at all for anyone who's pushed further into poverty by your £12.50 a day cost of living charge. I hear no sympathy for those people from you.
I've been quite clear in relation to the policies we've announced to support those families who may have a non-compliant vehicle. The £170 million supports those lower income families, supports charities, supports small traders, and supports sole traders as well. Clearly, if we had more money from the government, we could provide even more assistance to those families.
Okay, I didn't hear a single word of sympathy there, Chair, so I will leave it there.
Assembly Member Prince.
Keith.
Is that any good? Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you're not correct, are you, when you said in answer to the question on signage that if you can't put signs in the county roads that people will just have to incur the charge without notice? I'm sure you are aware that there is legislation that requires you to put signage in advance so that somebody can choose an alternative route, and that is why indeed in some of the boroughs in London the whole borough will not actually be within the ULEZ zone, and some of the roads will be excluded from the ULEZ road in order to allow that escape route.
So I think we're talking across purposes. I think the question was in relation to the consequences of the home counties not putting up signs. And my point was, if the home counties don't put up signs, the residents, drivers won't know that they're entering into London, which is got a London-wide ultra-low emission zone.
But they will, because the signage will be before you enter the ULEZ zone with an escape route. So it just means that, as I've already explained, people will go into parts of London. There will be certain roads in London that they can enter because that's the only escape route out of the ULEZ. You can't just all of a sudden be inside the ULEZ and start paying it. There has to be an escape route. That's in the legislation.
So there are signs within London, and there'll be signs on the borders of London. But the idea of there being signs in and around the home counties is to make people well aware in advance of them reaching London, rather than getting to the border and then having to do a detour. So we're hoping that home counties change their minds, as indeed London councils have changed their minds. because it's in nobody's interest to try and use this as a backdoor way to frustrate the ultra emission zone.
I'm going to leave it there, actually. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can I welcome to... I do apologise. Assembly Member Duval.
Mr. Mayor, in terms of all these issues, can you just quickly update us of where the government is? You mentioned it briefly, but didn't tell us where we are, about adding some more money into the scrappage scheme, because, of course, the members opposite have been campaigning for that, haven't they? I bet they've not. But let's see if they're going to ask any questions around that. So where have we got to with government on adding more money to the scrappage scheme, like they've given the rest of the UK, rather than to London?
Well, if we work on the basis that when members in this Assembly raise issues of concern about poverty in those in outer London and concerns about those in home counties, you'd have expected them to be lobbying the government for more support towards, for example, a scrappage scheme. And we were hoping there'd be cross-party working to try and persuade the government to give London and the home counties the same support they've given other parts of the country, those in Manchester, those in Birmingham, those in Bath, those in Portsmouth and elsewhere. The good news is we have seen colleagues in the home counties from other parties, Labour and other parties, lobbying the government for more support, the MP for Slough and others. I've seen no evidence of colleagues in this Assembly lobbying the government for more support. So if they are sincere, and we've got to work on the basis they are sincere, about expressing concerns about constituents who may be affected by this, the words used by the new leader of the Conservative group is those suffering food poverty. You'd have expected them to be lobbying privately and publicly the government. I've seen no evidence of that. We're going to carry on lobbying the government privately and publicly for more support towards this, because we do care about those families.
And it is that very government that still says something about ULEZ in one place amongst themselves when they're talking amongst themselves, but actually in government says actually we want to support ULEZ throughout the country and we're willing to put money behind it. Sadly not in London. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've seen evidence of them playing off other parts of the country against each other. So some parts of the country they're saying you've got to do a clean air zone, ULEZ, otherwise you'll be in breach of air quality laws. And we've done that. And are ahead of the game and making progress, seen as a world leader, and no support from the government. And so it's a good example of the government saying one thing to one part of the country, another thing to another.
I am confused by the opposition stance within the Assembly, because I'm not sure whether they support ULEZ or they just don't support it now because of the cost of living crisis. They talk a lot about the cost of living crisis around that, but they don't really want to add the other issues in, isn't it? Isn't it a bit unfair that it's always you adding to the cost of living crisis, but actually we ignore completely all the other issues of their policies that add to the cost of living crisis? Well, I tell you what, let's do an audit. Let's put the money where it is, what their policies do in terms of the burden on cost of living crisis, when actually this cost is about making sure cleaner air quality, that even the Evening Standard, that's one of your biggest critics, has got behind you and supporting you on it, because that's the trend. And they may laugh, but actually it's not a laughing matter when you're talking about the health of Londoners, when you're talking about early deaths. And you can be cavalier and you can play your political points, but in terms of what we need to be doing and moving ahead on this issue, we were already behind because of Boris Johnson delayed the issues of ULEZ. We're catching up. And in that delay, people have suffered. Now, if you're prepared to let that suffering goes on, Mr. Mayor, so let's do it. What's the plan B? If you're found in terms of legal issues, you're going to make yourself legal compliant. But there's nothing in terms of legal actions that's going to stop ULEZ being introduced.
Well, the thing is, Chair, that when the members of the Assembly laughed at reference to the Standard, you'd have forgotten that George Osborne's no longer the editor of the Standard, which is why they're so upset. And the good news is the Standard have got excellent journalists, some of them sitting in the gallery today, who do excellent work reporting on matters relevant to Londoners, and we're very grateful for the excellent work they do. But here's the point: where do you hear this group complaining about the £7,000+ added to the owner-occupier because of mortgages going up because of their policies? Where's their concern about the 20% increase in food inflation Senator Ahmed raised because of a direct consequence of their policies? Where's their concerns in relation to exports going down because of the hard Brexit, causing real problems to these families? But you know, the point that Leonie Cooper was mentioning in relation to the doctors is you've got medics, you've got health experts, you've got parents of children with stunted lungs saying they would like this policy rolled out. I understand there are concerns with some people who've got vehicles that are polluting, and so why are they working with us to lobby the government for more financial support? And that's what I don't understand. That's why I can understand people being suspicious that their motives aren't concerned about these families. Their motives aren't concerned about us going too fast. It's a good example of them always being opposed to this policy, 2017, 2019, 2021 and 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I welcome to the public gallery the Lewisham People's Parliament? Thank you. You're very welcome here. Our next question concerns cannabis smoke, and it's from Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you, Chair. The use of illegal drugs harms individuals, families and communities across our city. Dame Carol Black's review estimated the illegal drugs market to be worth £9.4 billion a year in England and Wales, but that the associated health harms, crime and impacts on wider society could be costing us more than double that. There is no question that we need to do more to tackle this epidemic. The police have an important role, and the Commission and I are committed to strengthening the Met Police Service's response to the organised criminals behind the drugs trade, drug-related violence and neighbourhood crime and antisocial behaviour. Local policing is particularly important in this regard, and the Commissioner's updated turnaround plan will aim to provide the strongest ever neighbourhood policing. But policing alone cannot solve a complex social problem like the misuse of drugs. Project Adder has led to a significant number of police seizure of drugs, weapons and illicit finances, coupled with local authority and voluntary sector work to support vulnerable drug users into treatment. The London Drugs Forum has brought these partners together, along with others from the health and criminal justice system, to ensure there is a holistic approach to tackling drug-related harms and crimes. I'm pleased to say that through City Hall funding and the partnership built through London Drugs Forum, Project Adder is being expanded to carry out its vital work across the whole of London. Drug laws themselves remain an issue of significant debate. It's right that the Mayor of London should make a constructive and evidence-based contribution to that debate. That's why I've convened experts from medicine, law, policing, academia and community relations to form the London Drugs Commission. The Commission is considering the impact and effect of current cannabis laws on crime, particularly violent crime, public health and economic outcomes. It is exploring police enforcement of those laws and support and treatment services for addicts. The Commission is also examining the latest evidence from the UK and across the globe on the harms of cannabis, the best methods of prevention, the most effective criminal justice responses, the public health benefits of different approaches and other relevant factors. The Institute for Global City Policing, based at University College London, has been appointed as a research partner to gather and review this evidence. Based on this research, the Commission will make recommendations to improve the current legal framework and practice. I won't know what they'll recommend until that work's been completed, but I look forward to receiving their findings in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me read the question I actually asked you, as you didn't bother to answer it. From the Member of Parliament for Holborn and St Pancras, quote, "There's a family in my constituency. Every night, cannabis smoke creeps in from the street outside into their children's bedroom, aged 4 and 6. Keir Starmer said, that's not low-level crime, it's ruining lives. I actually agree with him for once. Do you agree with him?
I do, but you didn't read the next paragraph, what he said. So we won't pull any punches on this. Everyone protected, everyone respected. That's what justice means. And the Tories are soft on it. Soft on antisocial behaviour, soft on the crime that most affects working class communities. Only Labour will protect them. I agree with that too.
Well, the person responsible for crime in London for the last 7 years, believe it or not, I think is you. And cannabis use has become far more widespread. In fact, it's effectively become decriminalised under your reign. Isn't that correct?
Well, actually, the areas in the country where they've started drug diversion methods are in areas like Thames Valley. Last time I checked, there wasn't a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner there. Durham as well. So if he's suggesting his colleagues in Durham and Thames Valley are somehow, inverted commas, soft, I think he should take that up with them. I'm quite clear. We've got a evidence-based commission taking place. You've got people that I respect, like William Hague, supportive of this approach, the Chair of the Assembly, also supportive of this approach, and I'm disappointed he's playing party politics with an issue about evidence-based policy. But again, they did the same with ULEZ, so I'm not surprised.
Well, you wanted to talk about doctors earlier, so I'll read you a paper from the Lancet, the medical journal, entitled Cannabis Use and Public Health, Time for a Comprehensive Harm to Others Framework. And in there, as you seem to be still very keen to decriminalise drugs, it says, and I quote, the principal adverse consequences that can occur in association with cannabis use include acute psychometric control impairment, cannabis use disorder, eye dependence, mental health problems, e.g. psychosis, depression, suicide, driving impairment and fatal or non-fatal injuries from motor crash. I can go on and on. Isn't it true, Mr. Mayor, that you want to decriminalise drugs that will really harm Londoners? And just to remind you, this is the London Assembly, this is the Greater London Authority. We shouldn't be talking about Durham and Thames Valley. We should be talking about your appalling record for 7 years in crime in London. And Keir Starmer is weak as you on these issues, but he's trying to pretend that he's tough on crime. But we all know that you're soft on crime, Mr. Sadiq Khan.
I mean, Chair, I give up. Is that what is that? I mean, what you know what I mean? I mean,
yes. I have some toleration for members making statements. People from every side do, but it shouldn't be like looking for a needle in a haystack for a question.
I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman, as he's clearly not going to answer any of my questions as usual.
I think that question has left the room. Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember McCartney, and it concerns London's businesses.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in answer to the question. The government's incompetent management of our economy and their Brexit deal have unleashed inflation and a cost of living crisis that's making the cost of doing business in London harder than ever. London is the engine of the UK economy, and when the capital succeeds, so does the rest of the country. But sadly, national policies are holding us back. I've been clear that the government should be working with us to help unlock growth and prosperity and get our economy firing all cylinders. The country is facing an economic downturn. The UK is predicted to face the worst recession and the weakest recovery in the G7. The government's failure to deliver the funding and investment our capital needs is limiting our ability to tackle these challenges head-on and return to growth and prosperity. I've been engaging with businesses and industry bodies to better understand the support needed. That's why I've been disappointed that the government won't yet reinstate tax-free shopping for overseas visitors. That would give a much-needed boost to London's retail and hospitality sectors. Another inescapable truth is that the government's extreme hardline version of Brexit is having a detrimental effect on Londoners and our businesses, impacting growth, trade and talent at a time we can least afford it. I've called for a more constructive relationship with the EU and a pragmatic debate about the benefits of being a part of the customs union and the single market. For example, the government should ease post-Brexit restrictions preventing young Europeans coming to the UK, which should provide a boost to our economy in London. With 2/3 of businesses in our city struggling to fill the vacancies they need, I've also called on the government to allow us to create a regional shortage occupation list. That's one way to give businesses the ability to attract and retain talent in the areas they need it the most. The government should also reform the planning system. The Centre for Cities' recent report found rising costs of workspaces and housing have had a negative impact on London's productivity and competitiveness.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Recent figures show that UK exports are now the lowest in the G7. Do we have any figures as to how that's affecting London and our exports?
I'm afraid the figures aren't broken down by regions and by London, but we're big exporters of services. Yeah. And we do know there's been an impact in relation to UK services being exported because of a lack of financial passporting with the European Union. So no figures for London, but you'll have seen the last 2 days, car manufacturers have now expressed their concerns in relation to the consequences of them still staying in the UK, let alone impact on exports.
Thank you. You mentioned towards the end of your opening there that you've recently called for a review of post-Brexit visa rules.
Now, small businesses in my constituency in Enfield and Haringey, particularly, for example, the restaurant sector along Green Lanes, are really struggling not only with inflation and other costs, but also with recruitment of staff. What exactly is it that you want the government to do about visa rules, and are they listening? Are you actually having active discussions with them?
So the challenge we have in London is not simply a skills shortage, but a labour shortage. And so I'm speaking to restaurants, not just in your constituency, but across the city now, who sometimes aren't open at lunchtime because they can't have two sittings because they've not got the staff. And it's a big problem. I accept we've got to be training up more people from London and elsewhere in our country to do these jobs, but some of these jobs are still not going to be filled. We've got record numbers of vacancies in hospitality, social care, healthcare, and so forth. So even with the best one in the world, if every single person who could be trained was trained, we still have vacancies in these sectors. So what I'm saying to the government is, if they introduced, for the short term, either a COVID recovery visa, or it was to devolve to other parts of the country, including London, a regional shortage occupation list, we could speak to employers, say what is the shortages, and allow people to come to the UK to fill those shortages. And by the way, if they come to the UK and they're doing this work, they're paying taxes, they're paying national insurance, the businesses are doing better, they're paying taxes, they're paying corporation tax, VAT, and so forth. So it's a virtuous circle. The shops benefit, more people shopping, and so forth. And so there is no downside to this. And the only reason the government is saying no is dogma. And businesses are closing down because of government dogma.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Assembly Member Fortune. I do apologise.
There we go.
One.
I gave it a wiggle. This is a really important question. When business is working in London, it's going to benefit all of us. Do you remember, Mr. Mayor, we had a conversation a while back about small businesses in London. We were talking about the Federation of Small Business and the Fair Pay report. Do you remember that conversation we had? And that focus was about prompt payments. And that was in September 2021. And I asked if payments from the GLA were prompt and on time. And so I went back to look on the notes at this, because you said at the time that you recognised the issue, you checked that we pay our suppliers quickly and speedily, particularly the small ones. The difficulty we had was that wasn't actually happening at the time. Just to remind you, in 2018-19, there were 1,280 invoices paid late. So that's £13.5 million of money that should have gone from the GLA out to small businesses that was late. And then 1920, there were 1,242 invoices, that's £12.4 million, delayed at the GLA, that was going out late to small businesses. I asked for the 2021 figures, and understandably you didn't have them, and fair enough, you said you'd send them to me. And I was quite reassured by some of the things you said, because, I went back to look at the notes, and you recognised how important it is, and this is you, particularly with small business, where cash flow is so important if they don't get that prompt payments. Like I say, that was back in September 21. Unfortunately, June 2022, so September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, 10 months later, I had to ask you again because I didn't get those figures, which was disappointing. I finally got them in July. Now, those figures in July told me that, sadly, only 84% of those payments were on time, which means as a result of that, £9.7 million was held here at the GLA that didn't go out to businesses. Now, no one else is to blame here. We can't shift this off. You're the mayor, you're the chief exec, this is your firm, and you're paying late. I asked you if you had a clear policy on making sure that payments were prompt. And you said to me, yes, we do have a policy. And you said, I know because I checked it a while ago. And it's always worth being vigilant. So just to remind us all, what's the policy in terms of percentage of payments that you want made promptly?
So I've not got the figure with me, but there is a target to be paid on within X days. And that's not good enough in relation to 84%. It should be higher than that. I can come back to him in the next 24 hours as to what the figure is.
You'll be unsurprised to find out I've got it.
Oh, great.
So it's the payments. It's got to be 90%. That's the target, and that's not a new target. And again, you said here, it's a really important issue, and it would be heartbreaking, if now that we've come out of the pandemic, business did not stay afloat because of lack of cash flow. So 90% is the target. So I went to have a look at performance across the period. So 13-14, and I appreciate that this wasn't your mayoralty, this was the previous mayor, it was 92.5%, that's target hit. 14-15, it was 92.7%, 93% target hit. 15-16, it was 93.8% target hit. 2016-2017, that's the year you were elected, it's dropped down to 88.5%, so that's the first time it's dipped below the target missed. 17-18, 81%, 81.9% target missed. 1920 that we talked about, there was a bit of a peak there, it went up to 84%, and then we get to 2021, which was that figure I was looking for in July. As I said, that was £9.7 million held up, which should have been payments from here going to small business, which, as you said, is heartbreaking. Last couple of years aren't great either. So this is after I asked you the question. This is after you promised me you're going to look at it. This is after you said you'd grip it. 2021, 2022, it's gone down to 79%. Cash figure on that is £16.5 million held here in the GLA, your firm, that's not going out to small businesses. It's delaying payments. It's breaking that cash flow at a really difficult time. 2022, 2023, latest figures. What do you reckon? You want to go higher? Do you want to go lower? Where do you think it's going to go? 74%. 74%. Just over a quarter of payments from your firm going out to small businesses that are late. So bearing in mind, I asked this question in September 2021. I asked it again in June 2022. Here we are in 2023. You've promised to grip this. You've promised to take control of it. Why are things getting worse?
It's simply not good enough. It's simply not good enough. Even if you excuse the COVID years, what your stats show is that it's poor before the COVID years and it's poor after the COVID years, so that's not good enough reason. And you're right, the reason for the heartbreak is because the cash flow coming in is different in paying your bills and not paying your bills. And so to all those firms who have received payments later than they should have done, I apologise. As soon as Mayor's question time is over, I want to go and look into this personally. And I'm happy to work with you in relation to seeing what the issue is. I can't think of an excuse to go as low as 74%. We could quibble about, if you said to me it's 89%, 88%, we could talk about that's not good enough. And the target's not 100%, by the way. The target is 90% for a very good reason, because it's not realistic to 100% target. That's got to be sorted out.
So I appreciate that, and actually I appreciate the apology, but you will understand the touch of cynicism here that I asked the question in 2021, well. No, asked the question in 2022,
no, that's fair.
2023,
I think that's very fair.
It's still going. So what reassurance can you give me and London businesses that you're going to grip this?
Well,
because we don't want platitudes. It's kind of kind of Sadiq checks in the post Khan, don't worry about it, leave it with me, Gov, I'm on it. How are you going to grip this?
Firstly, can I just thank you for the way you've raised it and going through it as you've done. I promise you've made an impression on me today in relation to promises I made to you, which is a promise to take seriously to a member of the Assembly, not being actioned. And can I agree to speak to you next week in relation to me reassuring you privately you're happy with what I've found and what I'm going to do, and we'll take it from there, because, politics aside, we both want the same ends. It's clearly not happening. So, Chair, if that's an agreement with you, I can agree to meet with Peter next week and see hopefully I'll know by then next week what the issue is, and then let's sort this out, because what we both want is that they've done the work, right, and get the money they deserve.
Thanks, and you'll understand that, like Arnie, I'll be back.
Well done. A number of Assembly members have got mayoral commitments today, so that's really good. I think we'll now take a break for 5 minutes, if that's okay. 10 minutes? What's the consensus? Without a vote, look at me, tell me 10 minutes? 10. Or 5? 10 minutes from now. Thank you.
The home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Reconvene if possible. Shall I? I'll give it a bang.
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, members. For the next question, I'm going to hand over the chairing to the Deputy Chair, Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Deputy Chair. Walking is an important way to keep healthy and enjoy the world around us. And for those who are able, it's often the best way to get out into London's array of green spaces to connect with nature. It's important we protect both public footways and connected wildlife wherever possible. My transport strategy includes a key proposal to protect, improve and promote the Walk London network, and TfL provides a range of guides and other advice on how to get the most from London's walking routes. Footpath 47 is located within the boundary of land owned by Barking Riverside Limited. It's run east to west along the River Thames and north up to the Gores Brook, and it's designated in Barking and Dagenham as a public right-of-way. Barking Riverside Limited is the master developer responsible for the Barking Riverside development. Barking Riverside Limited is a joint venture private limited company between L&Q New Homes and the Greater London Land and Property Limited, GLAP. My Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development, Tom Copley, sits on the Barking Riverside Limited board along with 2 JLA officers. I visited the site many times during my time as Mayor and have seen the riverside ecology. It's an asset to the area and those who access it, with a rich and diverse variety of wildlife spanning across the site. I understand that Barking Riverside Limited is fully committed to protecting and enhancing the wildlife habitat areas along the footpath and across the site, and has agreed planning obligations to support this. As part of that, Barking Riverside Limited is committed to ensuring the footpath is preserved for public use. I'm aware, though, that works will be required to the riverside to enhance flood protection as new homes are developed closer to the River Thames in line with the Thames Estuary 2100 plan. Footpath 47 falls within the boundary of these works, and due to the nature of the engineering activity, the footpath will need to be temporarily diverted as homes are developed in and around the riverside. Barking Riverside Limited will be required to work with residents and the relevant statutory bodies to ensure suitable notification ahead of any temporary diversions and manage the ecological impacts accordingly. I'm advised these works are part of the overall plan to enhance landscape, habitats and accessibility consistent with my London plan and the wider vision for River Thames.
Thank you for that answer. It's new information to me that there is going to be another temporary diversion because there was one in 2014. Could you undertake, Mr. Mayor, to get Barking Riverside Limited to embark upon some public information? Because certainly people in the Barking Riverside area, including Thames View and the wider Barking and Dagenham as well, are viewing with concern the pace that the development is rushing towards the Thames. And I think they need reassurance in the area of what the future plans will be, and a lot of information up front, not just waiting until the last minute to tell people that the footpath is going to be diverted. Could you give that undertaking?
I can, and can I go a step further? So I raised this with Tom Copley yesterday for reasons you'll appreciate, and I think the reason why your point is even more important is because that work with the community before the plans are finalised is what you want to do to get the confidence back. So I was told that the BRL are intending to divert the footpath in stages to minimise the extent of the diversions, and would engage with the community in advance of that stage. I think your advice is do it now.
Let them know now. Yeah, this is what I'm asking.
So let me take that away,
Thank you.
And I'll ask Tom to just confirm that with you, so you're reassured and you can pass that on to the local community, because otherwise it doesn't engender confidence building, does it?
I mean, in terms of the free advert space I've got here, anybody who wants to go and enjoy Footpath 47 and the wildlife that collects around it, you can just go to Barking Riverside Station or Barking Riverside Pier to enjoy it. Finally, Mr. Mayor, we've talked about the value of green space, and you so passionately spoke of that earlier. Do you support your party leader's plan to build on London's green belt?
I think to clarify what the leader of their party was saying was there are some pieces of green belt that clearly aren't green belt. I can think of car washes that are green belt, but aren't really green belt. And I think what he's referring to is a situation where there are some pieces of land that are designated green belt but clearly aren't. And on those pieces of land, if they are developable and won't damage the green space, then those should be considered. But it should be a decision made by the local authority, consulting and working with local residents.
Mr. Mayor, how quickly do you think the Green Belt would look derelict if that was the only criteria for building on it? How quickly do you think that the Green Belt would become derelict if that was the criteria for justifying developing on it?
Car washes.
If you use that precedent.
Yeah, so very little of the Green Belt around London is used by car washes. I've been quite clear, green belts are the lungs of our city. They're there to prevent urban sprawl and all the rest of it and stuff, but also they can indirectly, by giving permission of green belt, can inflate the land price and stuff. So there are really good reasons why we've got the protection.
Thank you very much, sir. The next question is concerning women and girls in London, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. I'm a proud feminist and I'm committed to doing everything I can to tackle gender inequality across London. For International Women's Day this March, I invited experts to a policy summit to discuss key issues affecting women and girls. I also published a call for all public bodies to become women-friendly workplaces. I lead by example with gender-specific employment policies for colleagues experiencing adverse symptoms of menopause, perimenopause, or debilitating gynecological pain. Advancing women at every level of the organisation is a key measure of our corporate success, and I've developed a strategy to support women's development into leadership positions. I'm committed to addressing the causes of gender pay inequity by tackling issues including pay discrimination, recruitment processes, and the support needs of carers. There's still more to be done, but the GLA gender pay gap has narrowed since I became Mayor. It's 2% compared to the London average of 15.4%. I published updated equality, diversity and inclusion objectives in November, outlining my plans to advance a fairer, more equal and integrated city with updated commitments on gender-based issues. Making London safer for women and girls is a top priority for me. Since 2016, I've overseen investment of over £100 million from City Hall, including over £45 million in specialist support for victims and survivors, over £35 million in safe accommodation for anyone who's experienced some domestic abuse, over £70 million in programmes addressing perpetrator behaviour, including pilot involving perpetrators moving out of family home whilst undertaking behavioural change work, over £4 million in prevention activities that challenge incorrect perceptions about what is acceptable behaviour in relationships or in the public, and this includes the £1 million to embed a new violence against women and girls prevention toolkit in every London primary school. I created a Women's Night Safety Charter to make London a city where all women feel confident and safe at night, especially in public transport, and the London Night Czar has prioritised guaranteeing the safety of women and girls at night since her appointment. We also run several programmes to support women's housing needs. I established the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation Partnership Board to fund provision of support and accommodation for domestic abuse survivors, and my Life of the Streets board works to support women sleeping rough. We've achieved a lot, but there's a lot more to do, and I remain committed to challenging inequality against women and girls at every level.
Thank you. This morning, you actually said that you agreed with everything, all the findings from Louise Casey, the Casey report. So you accept the MPS is misogynist, you say. You've said this morning that you accept the Vaughan strategy rings hollow, because that's what she says. I mean, she says the Met's Vaughan strategy rings hollow since its claim to be prioritising serious violence has not really included the crimes that most affect women and girls. So Dame Casey was very strong about how badly the Met was doing, and after all, you are the Police and Crime Commissioner. And yet, if you look at your tweets, it's, yay, look how great I am, look what I'm doing. I've done a video, which has won awards, to say how wonderful things are. What is it, Mr. Mayor? You're saying everything's wonderful. Louise Casey, who you said just this morning, because I was listening to you, that you agree with everything she says. So what is it? Are you wonderful as you'd like us have you believe, or is Dame Louise Casey correct?
Well, Chair, I fully accept, as has been said, Dame Louise Casey's report. She was commenting on the Met Police Service, not on City Hall and me, as a consequence of Dame Louise Casey's report, but also the work that the new Commissioner was doing. They are refreshing and having a new violence against women and girls strategy, and more details of that will be unveiled shortly, and also in the turnaround plan, which has been consulted on. There'll be more details of the work they're doing to address the issue of violence against women and girls. Separately, we have a separate policy on violence against women and girls because it's more than just policing. So we do work in relation to shelters, in relation to targeting the behaviour of perpetrators. One of the things we've done with probation and the police is around GPS tagging of perpetrators. So there are things we're doing with the police, but the work we do in relation to violence against women and girls isn't limited to policing.
Yet you can't keep detaching yourself from the Metropolitan Police, Mr. Mayor. You are the Police and Crime Commissioner. When it suits you and things are going well, you'll tell us, everybody, that you are the Police and Crime Commissioner. At any other points, and far too frequently, you detach yourself completely. In your answer to me, you also say that you've got a night star or somebody who's looking after women feeling unsafe after dark. And believe you me, we do. And yet it's been found that the extended ULEZ, which we are so against, will force some women out of their cars because they're non-compliant, and they'll have to be out in the streets at night feeling very, very unsafe. It's another aspect to the ULEZ. So would you say that that's a good thing?
Well, there are a number of aspects of the ULEZ that will support women. So one of the things we know is consequences of air pollution.
Well, can you deal with what I've said that it doesn't? Can we be specific?
Well, you're asking about women's safety.
I'm actually saying that the ULEZ, it's been reported, is going to force more women to use public transport and therefore walk around after night not feeling safe. I'm a woman. I can tell you I do not feel safe at night.
Sure. I was dealing with women's safety with ULEZ, which was the question you asked me. So we know that women are less safe because of air pollution. A number of specific examples of where women are less safe because of air pollution is women who are pregnant are less safe because of air pollution. Women who drive in cars that are non-compliant are less safe because of air pollution.
Mr. Mayor, as usual, you're not addressing the point, and for time reasons, I'll stop there because it's a complete waste of time. You're not listening to the questions and giving proper answers to people that are listening to this and don't feel safe at night. I'm one of them. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Bailey, please.
Morning, Mr. Mayor. Crime on the tube has risen from 7.5 million crimes per journey in 2016 to 12.1 crimes per million journeys in 2021. And of course, much of these crimes are directed at women. So what are you doing to make public transport safer for women?
So one of the reasons that we began the campaign when I became mayor in relation to Report It, Stop It, was to encourage more reporting of things that are clearly crime but weren't being reported because women didn't think action was going to be taken. Obvious thing that you and I don't experience but women do is being touched up and sexually harassed on the tube. So that's led to more women reporting these things and action being taken. One of the reasons we reintroduced staff taken away from the tubes is to make sure there were human beings there to respond to these claims. The other thing we did that directly affects women using public transport is I supported the campaign by Gina Martin to make upskirting a criminal offence. So it's now a criminal offence in this country to take photographs of women up their skirts. It wasn't until very, very recently. The other thing we've done is to make sure that in relation to the platforms, we've got CCTV coverage of the platforms, and now most of our train lines as well have CCTV inside the vehicles. And we're doing more in relation to the British Transport Police coverage of the underground, but also we pay for police officers to spend time policing the underground and public transport as well. You'll be aware that when the night tube and night overground began, we supported more police officers around those transport hubs for the obvious reasons that many women would be travelling home late at night and may feel scared and be vulnerable to attack. So, you know, the fact that more people are reporting this is good, but it's no consolation because that means that more people are victims of crime as well. So I don't accept the explanation. We should welcome more reporting because it shows more confidence. I think a lot of the more reporting is because more women are facing what the HMI says is a national epidemic of violence against women and girls.
So to be clear, there's been a rise from 7.5 million crimes per million journeys to 12.1. It's a 61% rise. So many of the things you've just outlined are already in place. So you could argue are either ineffective or are still yet to be effective. So what else can be done? Because this is a 61% rise. It's a steep rise. And if you continue the way we are, you'll have no impact. It will just keep going up.
Well, Report It to Stop It encourages women to report it where they weren't in the past reporting it. So you're going to see an increase because people are reporting it with the idea being to stop it. And so we do encourage people to report these things, even if they think it's not a crime. And the more people report it, the more it will lead to action being taken.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I need to stop for time reasons, but reporting it is still means a crime exists and somebody needs to do something about it.
Thank you. The next question concerns adult social care, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the question. I'm very disappointed that the government has cut its promised investment in social care workforce training and development from £500 million to £250 million. This is the last thing we need. Social care workers look after our most vulnerable Londoners, supporting people of all ages with a range of conditions to live their lives with independence, dignity and control. We owe a debt of gratitude to our social care workforce on whom so many Londoners depend. With an ageing population, many with multiple complex needs, it's more important than ever that social care workers have the right training to care with skill and compassion. But over the past 13 years of austerity, this workforce has been severely neglected. Social care is highly skilled and can be hugely rewarding. Yet despite their exceptional service, care workers remain amongst the lowest paid, with pay failing to keep pace with other sectors. Between 2012 and 2022, the vacancy rate in adult social care in London more than doubled from 5.9% to 13.2%. Sickness rates are high in London at 7.5%, and across London, turnover rates are over 25%. This is a profession under strain. A well-resourced social care system is vital for reducing pressure on the NHS. I'm playing my part by funding 5 new social care skills academy hubs. These will help people from disadvantaged communities into employment into a sector that's key to our recovery, supporting them via local training and recruitment into good social care jobs. But I can only do so much. The government needs to stop rowing back on its promise to support this vital workforce. Indeed, it needs to produce a comprehensive social care workforce plan that will complement the still unpublished NHS workforce plan.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. Of course, it's double whammy for the social services because A, the investment has gone down, and secondly, the reform program that we were promised for so long has been denied. In fact, this is like a old man standing in the middle of the road with a fast approaching lorry coming towards him, and the old man hoping that he'll die before the lorry hits him. These aren't my words. These are words of Andrew Dilnot, the person who brought the social reform report for Prime Minister Cameron, implying that the social services now are in a worse state than the NHS. And the vacancy rate in London is worse than the rest of the country. The rest of the country is about 10.5%, and in London it's 12.8%. And so the question is what can we do in London to make the social services more attractive to people in London? Is there anything we can do from City Hall, Mr. Mayor?
So look, firstly, thanks for your question. I wasn't aware that Andrew Dillon had said that quote. To prepare for Mayor's question time, I looked at the last few years in relation to this area, the promises made and rode back on, and this is one example. But the reason why it's so important for us as a city is every single one of us, if there's one issue on this MQTs that affect all of us, it's social care. Whether presently with some of our parents or whether it's ourselves needing social care going forward. And at some stage, politicians in Parliament of all sides have got to get together and make this a cross-party issue. It's too important to be left to one party rather than the other. So that being said, and I accept your critique of government's inaction, from City Hall we're doing what we can in relation to the skill and labour shortage. I mentioned in my answer some of the social care hubs. We've set up 5 new social care hubs. We're working with the NHS in relation to health care hubs to train people up. We've got boot camps to help people with the skills in this sector and using some of the AEB money. I've got to be honest though, because the remuneration is not great in this sector, because the terms and conditions aren't great, the stress levels and so forth, question how many people are thinking about this as a career going forward or a vocation going forward. That's why we can do what we can at a regional city level, but we really need government, and it'd be great if both the main parties, all the parties got together and started working together on this, so whoever wins the general election, there is a plan in place that's cross-party support, because there are tough decisions that have to be made now. Although, we're a youngish city compared to other parts of the country, we've got an ageing population. Presents a whole host of opportunities and challenges.
I've been listening this morning, and I can see there's the members all over all sides of the debate are concerned about the cost of living crisis, and I think this is also a social care crisis. And maybe we should get together as an assembly to, along with yourself, to campaign for this issue, particularly as it has affected Londoners. And the other thing is how do you think we can make this effective, our representation more effective to the government? What can we do from this assembly to do that?
I think we can lead by examples to show that things we can do in London can make a difference around the country. I'll give you one example, which is an example from Sutton, actually, where Sutton Council had a really good policy around dementia-friendly. And Ruth, the leader of the council, was really impressive when I first discussed with her 3-4 years ago. And so we're now a dementia-friendly city. And so a council influencing a city, and if we can do stuff in London from dementia-friendly to social care, we can influence the country as well. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is make our city, more accessible to older people, from dementia-friendly to disabled access, step-free access, and so forth. The fastest-growing age group in London are older Londoners. By 2040, more than 1.6 million Londoners will be above the age of 65. I suspect many of us, by the way, are in that category. I declare an interest, and so we've got skin in the game, right? But also, if we can show Parliament that we can do something in London, just like Sutton were quite influential in London, I think we can be influential with the government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next question concerns more rigorous checks for the London Fire Brigade employees, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. I support the London Fire Commissioner's call for fire and rescue services to have powers to undertake enhanced DBS checks for staff. The Fire and Rescue Service is the only emergency service that does not carry out enhanced checks, even where frontline staff will be working directly with vulnerable people. There's no reason why the Fire and Rescue Service should be an exception among emergency services, particularly given the findings of the Inspectorate's recent report about cultural issues that exist across the service nationally. I welcome the recent announcement by the government that Fire and Rescue Services will now be able to carry out standard DBS checks rather than just basic DBS checks. This was a clear recommendation from the Inspectorate, and it was vital that this change was made quickly. However, this change is only the first step, and the government should take forward the remaining recommendations from the Inspectorate's report with urgency. This includes amending relevant regulations so fire and rescue services are able to undertake enhanced checks like other emergency services. In the February meeting of the Assembly Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee, the Commissioner referred to examples where the Brigade has had to dismiss people who are coming to the organisation who should never have been appointed. This speaks to the fact that fire and rescue services need effective systems in place to prevent unsuitable job applicants from joining, as we see in other emergency services. There are complexities that will need to be considered around how any new powers are applied retrospectively and which staff they'll apply to. These are not issues that affect London alone, but should be worked through at a national level. There is need for consistency in how background checks are undertaken across the fire and rescue service, which must bring it into line with other emergency services.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Mayor, and I absolutely agree with you. I think I was surprised to learn that the fire service, of all the services, were somehow exempt from enhanced DBS checks, and you're absolutely right. It's, particularly in light of the culture review into the fire brigade, this is more important than ever. As you said, the government are now moving from basic DBS check to standard DBS checks. Should they go further and move fire and rescue service staff to the enhanced checks that other blue light services have?
They should, and in fact, people won't realise that there are 4 levels of DBS check, right? Basic, standard, enhanced with barred list checks. And if you bear in mind, a lot of firefighters will go into our homes. There's been concerns about inappropriate behaviour, and so I think, by the Commissioner wants it. The Commissioner wants it. He's providing leadership. And we should have this around the country. And again, another example of us shining light in London, being ahead of the game. We see it in the police, see it in the fire, and you've got an organisation wanting this, and so I hope there's change sooner rather than later.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the Commissioner was very clear when he came to the FREP committee that he wanted for it. He was asking us to work together to put pressure on government to deliver this change. What can the LFB do now to ensure that they have the highest standards in the meantime until these measures come in from the government?
But there is a concern that I've got that because of the keenness of our Commissioner to do the right thing, we'll bring in policies that, when there's a national change, will be different to our policy. We'll have to do further checks again. So what the Commissioner is doing is speaking to colleagues around the country and the relevant stakeholders to make sure we can move as one in this area. So in the meantime, obviously, the Commission is making sure that we are employing the right people, kicking out the right people, still encouraging people to make complaints if there's concerns, both within the fire service and members of the public as well. The concern he's got is, with the best one in the world, he could be missing red flags by not having the right DBS checks. As the veteran I talked about, it's too easy to become a firefighter, too easy to become a police officer, too difficult to get rid of them. In the fire service, it's easy to get rid of firefighters we don't like, but it's doing that proactive work that's important. So I know the Commissioner's keen not to do work that will have to be undone, but he's going to move ahead at pace to try and persuade colleagues around the country to move.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question concerns trusting the police with expanded ULEZ camera data, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Berry.
Thanks, Chair. I've been clear that following Baroness Case's review, far-reaching reform is needed within the Met Police Service, both systemically and culturally, to regain the trust of all London's communities. In order to do this, the MPS need to demonstrate they have high standards, are open and transparent, and that they are truly accountable to Londoners. I've already acted to put the MPS on a path of systematic and cultural reform with the appointment of a new Commissioner and leadership team who acknowledge the scale of the problems and are committed to change, but clearly much more needs to be done and fast. While I'm determined to hold the Commissioner to account for reforming the Met Police Service, it's vital that we all continue to support them in their core mission to prevent and detect crime. The Automatic Number Plate Recognition System, ANPR, is a vital tool that assists the police in identifying, locating and detaining offenders, including those suspected of serious organised crime and terrorism. I'm acutely aware of how valuable personal privacy is, and policing powers must be balanced against individual rights. TfL has a range of robust policies, processes and technical measures in place to control and safeguard the personal data associated with the camera systems used for road charging schemes in London. For the existing agreement with the Met Police Service of data from the current cameras, access to data feeds has to be justified on a case-by-case basis. Data is only stored for 12 months unless it's saved as evidence for an investigation. Access to the data is limited to a small number of specialist staff for a time-limited period. The enhanced contextual data, the still images, are required by law to be of low resolution to reduce the likelihood that they allow for the identification of drivers and passengers. Together, measures like these provide a safe means of data being shared with the MPS without jeopardising civil liberties. There is currently no decision in place by TfL to grant the MPS access to data from the new ULEZ cameras associated with the expansion to Outer London. Any future access by the MPS will need to be in accordance with data protection requirements, and access will only be granted if the MPS demonstrates their use to be proportionate and necessary.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So yes, I appreciate you made a decision a year ago now to allow TfL camera data potentially to be given to the Met for long-term use and storage. But I understand, and I think you've just confirmed, that no data sharing agreements have yet been signed on that wider ULEZ zone. Now, I also know that you're aware there are a number of potential serious risks to rights from systems like this, and I know you're aware that since your delegation in MD 2977, the Casey review of the Met Police has delivered a damning verdict on the Met's institutional biases on race, gender and sexuality. In addition, individual misconduct is clearly a significant problem from the criminal cases against officers we're seeing continually in the news. I've got a list here, and several of them are worrying cases that involve the abuse of access to sensitive data. So are you personally willing today to go on the record to guarantee that the Met Police will be a reliable, competent and trustworthy holder of all this highly personal and sensitive data about Londoners that's being collected by TfL's cameras?
Well, the Met Police Service is a data controller. And so before the Met Police Service gets access to any of the cameras in the expanded ULEZ, there need to be another data protection impact assessment. And some of the things you mentioned would be considered under that, and then I'd make a decision, as you said, a mayoral direction if I decided to proceed. And I've said in my main answer the issue is one of proportionality and necessity, but the data protection impact assessment will also be considering issues that you've raised in relation to current use. I've seen in the stuff the MD did last year no evidence of no reasons not to continue with, and I've added additional safeguards going forward. The abuse you refer to wasn't in the stuff I saw last year, but if when it comes to any decision, clearly there needs to be all the information before I make a decision.
Okay, thank you. Now, when we first corresponded about your decision last year, I was assured that the data protection issues did need further consideration, and I think, again, you've confirmed that now, and that the data protection impact assessments remained live documents. So will you at least meet with myself and campaigners I'm in contact with who are working on these issues and want to discuss them with you? These include Open Rights Group, but also grassroots groups working on migrant rights and racial justice issues. If you would meet with me and those campaigners to discuss their concerns before you go any further, it would be much appreciated.
Yeah, Chair, I'm happy to give that undertaking to meet with the member and the people she refers to in relation
That would be great. I'm glad we're making progress on this issue, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question. Oh, I do beg your pardon. Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on data and ULEZ cameras, so I sent a Freedom of Information request to Brent Council around fly tipping data around 2 of the newly installed cameras from the 2021 expansion, and found that there was a 36% drop in fly tipping around one of the cameras and 24% drop around one of the others. Meanwhile, in neighbouring Harrow, fly tipping is up 30%, with the leader of the council even playing the "it wasn't me" Shaggy card in relation to a question on the issue. Even if you disagree with ULEZ and you don't want the 12,000 kilograms of NOx removed from your air, which is the impact in Harrow, should you not at least be working practically with Transport for London to agree on camera locations in your area, recognising the main aim of the cameras is to enforce and make sure that ULEZ is there a successful policy, but actually there's the additional benefit which could come across from crime and social behaviour and also fly tipping?
I think residents in Harrow must be pulling their hair out at the inaction and lack of prioritising what residents want them to prioritise. So let me just remind you that rather than Harrow Council spending taxpayers' money to resolve issues around fly tipping, they're using taxpayers' hard-earned money to pay for lawyers to bring a judicial review against TfL. And you've seen the difference in neighbouring Brent in relation to action on fly tipping versus Harrow. A good example of the difference having a good council can make.
The next question concerns fire safety and is in the name of Assembly Member Bakari.
Thanks for your question. I've always been clear that fire safety is a key priority in London. We owe it to those who lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire, the bereaved and survivors, to ensure a tragedy like that never happens again. GLA officers work very closely with the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience and the London Fire Brigade to promote fire safety, helping to keep communities safe. My London plan sets the benchmark for fire safety in London by requiring developments to achieve the highest standards of fire safety. The plan puts London at the forefront of building safety nationally, for example, requiring the provision of evacuation lifts in all buildings where lifts are installed. This ambition was behind my decision earlier this year to require all planning applications for residential buildings over 30 metres in height to be designed to provide 2 staircases before they're referred to the GLA for my decision at stage 2. My officers work closely with developers to implement the requirements of the London Plan and ensure that new developments coming forward adhere to these high standards. They're supported in this by the Brigade's specialist fire engineering team who comment on development applications in London through both planning and building regulation consultations. My officers also work closely with the Brigade and other stakeholders to finalise the London Fire Safety Plan guidance, which will provide further detail for developers on how to implement the London Plan for fire safety policy. For existing buildings that are already occupied, the Brigade's inspecting officers work with responsible persons and inspect buildings to make sure that people responsible are maintaining fire safety measures and meeting their responsibilities. This is most clearly demonstrated by the work undertaken on the high-rise building risk review, where LFB officers triaged or inspected around 8,000 high-rise buildings across London. All this work is underpinned by the prevention activities undertaken by the Brigade to provide safety advice to Londoners about the risk in their homes, including from e-bikes and e-scooters. While the LFB provides a world-class fire and rescue response, we want them to attend as few fires as possible, so this prevention work is crucial to help people take steps at home to keep themselves safe.
Thank you. You'll be aware that the top story on BBC London this morning is on yet another e-scooter fire, this time in Brent. In January 2022, when I first asked you about a public awareness campaign on unsafe lithium-ion batteries, and then I followed that up again in October again, I asked you about plans that you had to tackle on this particular issue, and at the same time, alongside Liberal Democrat MPs, I wrote a number of times to government ministers about this building safety and fire risk for Londoners. Over a year and a half later, the LFB have now started their vital public awareness campaign, Charge Safe. But after meetings with the LFB, they know that this isn't enough. Have you personally contacted government ministers during the last 12 months, calling on them to bring in regulations to tackle the issue of lithium-ion battery-related fires?
I want to put on record my thanks to Chris Philp, the Minister for Policing, Crime and Fire, who's been assiduous in responding to our concerns. So what Chris has done is arranged for the LFB to meet with the Office for Product Safety and Standards, who will bring forward a proposal around product safety. So the issue is in relation to online sales, the issue is in relation to conversions, and Chris has moved fast on this issue. Andy Rowe, the Commissioner, has briefed him, and so we are working with the government on this issue.
Will you be personally writing as well?
Well, the government's responding to this. The government's responding, so I'm not sure what the purpose of that would be, except to give Chris a pat on the back, which I hate doing, if I can avoid it. And so the key thing is, look, there are loopholes here. There are fires happening. Somebody lost their life on this issue. And the government recognises, and the Fire Minister recognises the loophole. He listens to the Commissioners and our views on this, and there should be some movement. But I'd say to anybody watching this, be very conscious when you're charging your e-bike, e-scooter. If your bike or scooter is a conversion or buying stuff online, you could be buying stuff that's very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, the Change Safe campaign has to be a success. We need to reduce these fires and help Londoners buy safe products from reputable companies. But until there is government intervention, particularly with online sales, this will be really, really challenging for the London Fire Brigade to do this on its own. Now, you've mentioned the government, but we also need you as well to take some charge and lead here. Will you help by looking at a mayoral kite mark for companies that sell e-scooters and e-bikes that promote the charge safe public awareness messages for maintenance and charging?
We've spoken to experts in New York, where they're a bit ahead of us in relation to this issue, and nobody suggested, the experts I've spoken to, a regional kite mark would be a way to resolve this, particularly with online sales. And so that's why we're working with the government in relation to the Office for Product Safety and Standards to discuss what can be done to address these concerns. But if it was the case that anybody suggested a regional kite mark would somehow stop online sales from often the Far East, more than happy to look into this. But, it's raising awareness from the public about the consequences of batteries, conversion kits, e-scooters and e-bikes. That's why we fully support the Charge Safe campaign led by the LFB.
I mean, I want the government to do more, but so can you, and I think this is a really good step forward. If you were to do your mayoral kite mark, it would make a difference, and I think that's something that we could be doing to help Londoners make sure that they're safer. We don't want any more deaths related to these types of fires. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question concerns cuckooing by Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Cuckooing is a horrific form of exploitation which sees vulnerable people being taken advantage of by drug dealers who coerce or violently force them into having their homes taken over for the purpose of the dealer's business. We know that many of the adult victims of cuckooing are people with complex needs, including drug addiction and mental health issues. Taking a partnership approach is vital in tackling this form of exploitation. The MPS has dedicated cuckooing officers who work with local authority housing teams, adult safeguarding, mental health and drugs treatment services to ensure vulnerable people are safeguarded and diverted from the criminal justice system where possible. The police service has introduced new processes and officer training to better recognise and record instances of cuckooing. Last year, there were 179 crime reports which were given this marker. My London Drugs Forum, which brings criminal justice, health and local authority partners together to reduce drug-related harms and crimes, is examining how they can enhance the work already underway to address this issue.
The forum will also be looking later in the year at the problems faced by drug users with multiple and complex needs, which will include addressing how we can protect the most vulnerable people from this type of exploitation. And the London Crime Prevention Fund provides boroughs with the opportunity to lead local work to support vulnerable people at risk of exploitation, including funding a post to address this issue in Camden. I'm committed to tackling the harms that result from drugs, having invested £4 million into Project Adder to support prevention, diversion and local engagement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today I released my report on cooking in London. I'm glad that you define what cooking is. It has a terrible impact on some of the most vulnerable Londoners. My report is a comprehensive snapshot of cooking across London. It makes 10 recommendations, but I would like to highlight 2 in particular: reporting and making it an offence. As reported in the Evening Standard today, and earlier I think you said there are some good reporters on the Evening Standard, the report shows that there has been a significant rise in cooking cases, a 300% increase if we compare 2018 to 2022. Despite some improvements, there's still an uneven recording of cooking across the capital, which suggests the true figure may be higher. Cooking needs a sharper focus. It is currently underreported, and we need to raise public awareness of the issue. So my question, Mr. Mayor, is will you look into how MOPEC can work with the MPS and local authorities to improve awareness of this issue?
Yeah, Chair, can I put on my record, and for those watching, this is another example of the good work the Assembly does. The report that you've done today in relation to this really important issue. I think you're right, by the way, in your view that there's probably a huge underreporting, so you're almost 300% increase may be an underestimate, which is really scary. I'm more than happy to give you that commitment and that undertaking. It's a really important issue, but also for the London Drugs Forum to also consider a lot of the recommendations you make, particularly in relation to the gaps in data and how data sharing could really make a difference in this area.
Mr. Mayor, earlier this year, in a report by the Centre for Social Justice, senior cross-party MPs, including Jess Phillips and Ian Duncan-Smith, called upon the government to make cooking an offence in the Modern Slavery Act. This is a call I support in my report, noting that there's a lack of guidance or even a definition from the government in dealing with cooking. Would you consider writing to the Home Secretary to support these calls, given cooking's terrible impact, as I said earlier, on vulnerable Londoners?
Well, Chair, why don't I agree to read the report and then write to the government. Just to remind colleagues that the Modern Slavery Act was only passed in 2015. And I think the intention was always there'd be evolving new forms of slavery. It's called the Modern Slavery Act. And this may be one area which is worth the government looking into as an area of evolving exploitation / slavery of vulnerable people. And so I'm more than happy to read the report and then write to colleagues in government to lobby them about this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I say, there are another 8 recommendations, but I'll let you read the report and come to your own conclusions. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
And it is very common. I had a case only 2 days ago that involved this. It's extraordinarily common, so good for the member for raising that.
Thank you, Chair.
The next question is TfL's workforce relations, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. In August, TfL reached agreement with the government on a funding settlement for TfL, which will last until the 31st of March 2024, or until TfL reaches financial stability, depending on which is sooner. The funding settlement places a number of requirements on TfL, including on raising revenue and pension reform. On the 14th of October 2022, TfL submitted a pensions options paper to the government. This was a direct response to the requirement in the deal to consider options to reform the TfL pension. Discussions between TfL and the government remain ongoing. No changes to the TfL pension are currently being proposed. If any changes were to be proposed in the future, TfL would consult fully with affected members and their representatives as appropriate. It remains TfL's position that any changes would not have any impact on benefits built to date. There is no denying that the future funding agreement and its associated requirements have put increased pressure on TfL and its workforce, including on morale. I have repeatedly made clear that the government's insistence on including a review into pensions reform was unwarranted and had the potential to lead to industrial action. TfL is committed to working positively with its staff and unions. Last year, over 15,000 TfL staff participated in the TfL Viewpoint Survey, which asked staff to reflect on their experience of working at TfL.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask, there were many deadlines in those funding agreements. There was a deadline around a final proposal on TfL pension reform that was the 28th of February. Was there any progress? It sounds like there wasn't agreement. Could you just
So the lines written for me by the civil servants are discussions are ongoing.
Fantastic. I'm sure they're... and I really appreciate and feel for TfL. They're in a very difficult situation in terms of the cuts to funding that have been forced on them by those funding agreements from the government. I am concerned that there may be some unintended consequences coming out of them, so I'd like to raise a couple of those with you. One of which is that I understand a revised consultation and collective redundancy process is being tabled by Transport for London, and the concerns have been raised to me that this is a watered down version of what was a very comprehensive process previously. And the danger with, my view, the danger with watered down proposals is that, especially in a context where we've lost a lot of talented TfL staff, that you can end up losing people when you don't go through full processes to understand what the implication of cutting staff is. Could you ask, can you commit to ask the Deputy Mayor for Transport to take a close interest in the industrial relations and particularly in this process?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. And the member raises a really important unintended consequence of some of these changes if not done properly. So I'm more than happy to commit to the Deputy Mayor being closely involved with any proposed organisational changes, but also the wider policy review process as well.
That's very welcome, thank you. And the other possibly unintended consequence that I'd like to raise is around savings in bus operations. So obviously the tendering process that is based around the routes that are going out to tender, but I am perhaps concerned that because those actual savings will be carried out by the bus operators, that again TfL may have that, what the impact is slightly at arm's length. Have TfL given you any assurance that there won't be unintended consequences in terms of workforce relations, workforce conditions, and also service quality as a result of those savings? And can we have some sort of further information on how to assure that?
Yeah, Chair, it's a really important issue that's been raised. One of the reasons for our concern about the lack of a funding deal and lack of certainty around capital is our inability to make the long-term deals with the private sector, including bus operators. And so I'm sure it wasn't the government's intention, but a consequence of these short ad hoc deals is we've had to do short last-minute deals with bus operators paying more than we otherwise would. And having a long-term capital deal means we can make long-term cheaper deals, because they're 7 years, 8 years, and so forth. So it benefits the taxpayer and also the bus user, as well as the company and the drivers and so forth. But you're right, we've got to make sure that the way bus operators don't make a saving is at the cost of the driver, which can then have a knock-on effect in relation to bus passengers. So it's a producer and a consumer interest. You'll be aware, since I've been there, we've massively improved. There's now a minimum wage for bus drivers, better terms and conditions, and so forth. And you're right, we've got to be cognizant about an unintended way of saving money being sacrificing service, and also the way our bus drivers are treated. With you, I was at a recent memorial to commemorate those who'd lost their lives during the pandemic, and the worst thing we could do to their families is, have current bus drivers treated worse than their loved ones were. So, my promise to you is to make sure we don't inadvertently have a situation where either bus drivers suffer or the services suffer. But I will again ask Seb to look into this, just to belt some braces to make sure we've not missed anything.
I'd be very grateful for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
I would now like to ask your agreement if the Assembly will agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed. Yeah, nobody's ever been against that. But thank you very much.
Chair, that's because the Mayor doesn't have a vote.
Well, I used to vote against it, actually, but anyway. The next question concerns the child-friendly city, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Sheikh.
Thanks for the question. I've been clear that London must support children and young people's independent mobility. That's why the first of my London Plan's good growth objectives is building strong and inclusive communities. This sets an objective for all Londoners, including children and young people, to be able to move around the city with ease and confidence to enjoy the opportunities London offers. My London Plan includes specific policies that promote the provision of safe and accessible routes to schools, such as through linking cycling and walking networks and the provision of accessible routes to youth centres and play spaces. Play is crucial to the children's well-being and development. The London Plan requires residential schemes to provide at least 10 square metres of good quality accessible play provision per child, which should be safely and independently accessible and not segregated by tenure. Large public realm schemes are expected to provide spaces for play and informal recreation, and boroughs are required to incorporate this expectation into their local plans. My public land charter and draft London Plan guidance on housing design standards provide further details on the provision of play and informal recreation space, and my Making London Child-Friendly report supports the assessment of public realm spaces to ensure they're safe and accessible.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and absolutely, I did enjoy reading your Making London Child-Friendly report, the foreword written by my colleague, Assemblymember McCartney. I think you've definitely got a handle on this agenda. I mean, I was shocked to understand that, between 1971 and 2010, children being able to walk to school alone decreased from 86% to 25%, whilst we saw child obesity increase. The ability for children to feel safe and free, and a crucial part of their emotional development is the idea of being able to have that independent mobility. And this has obviously been compounded during the pandemic, the kind of the limitations on it. So I was wondering if you could just drill down a little bit more about what increased challenges since the pandemic we face in terms of making our city child-friendly. It's a really interesting stat you just mentioned about the fact that fewer people are walking to schools by themselves, and so one of the things that we've tried to do is working with great councils like the first one we worked with was Camden. Camden in 2017 had the first school street in London. We'd have more than 500 all across London. And the reason why school streets are important is because they provide a safe environment for children to walk, scooter, cycle to school with mum, dad or carer. Which is one of the big concerns families have about safety, road safety of children. And the good news is, post the pandemic, there's been an acceleration of school streets across our city. The concern was after the pandemic, people would jump back in their cars, which is a problem we want to try and avoid where it's possible to walk, cycle, or use public transport. The other big concern we've got in relation to children's safety is where to play. And so during the pandemic, kids were basically locked away, inverted commas, for a year, definitely during those 3 months during the enforced lockdown. And some children weren't socialised to play publicly. They call them COVID babies and stuff. So we're trying to do what we can with nurseries and others to make sure we have children who may have been affected by the pandemic helped in relation to play spaces, hand-eye coordination and other things. We're not directly responsible for this. We can create an environment where children do so. Thank you very much. And obviously, at the beginning of the MQT, we heard about the support and the encouragement and the guidance that you're providing councils in order to increase the units of family-sized homes that they build. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what you're doing to push developers on this, and not just on family-sized homes, but also ensuring that play spaces aren't segregated by tenure.
It's a really important point in relation to what we can do indirectly to influence development. And the obvious thing is the London Plan. So the London Plan has policies in place in relation to a range of accommodation sizes, in relation to play space, in relation to public realm. And you mentioned the issue of, the tenure. So that includes the homes that I've recently been visiting with Tom Copley are homes which you couldn't tell from the home or the door if it was a council flat or a council home or shared ownership or private sector market value. And the same should go for playgrounds and so forth, and access to these facilities. And so it is really important that we think about that. And by the way, we've also got charters in place now for private land that are public spaces. You remember the old City Hall? A lot of that land outside wasn't owned by the public; was owned by a private landlord, and there are all strict rules about who could do what in that private space. We've made sure outside this City Hall that it is public realm available to the public without too many restrictions.
And I have to say, I've seen whether that's young families or dogs or people sunbathing, enjoying the public space outside. So I absolutely think that agenda is being pushed forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next question concerns Outer London public transport improvements. It's in the name of Assembly Member Prince.
Chair, I know time is short. I'm happy to send him the answer and he can ask me a supplementary question if that aids.
I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. Where I'm trying to go with this is the Superloop, which you announced a few weeks ago, doesn't get into Havering at all. And because of the shortage of time, I was wondering whether you'd be prepared to have a meeting, or your Deputy Mayor to have a meeting, on how we can improve transport links in Havering.
Chair, I'm always very happy to meet with Assembly members. I'll ask, or ask Deputy Mayors to, I'll ask Seb to meet with Keith in the first instance in relation to Havering and the Superloop to see if we can make progress there.
Thank you. And also, you did at the last meeting agree to meet with me regarding Wanstead Leisure.
Let me check. I'll follow that up after this meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Don't you want to talk for 8 seconds? No, okay. I would. The next question refers to trusting the police with live facial recognition technology, and Assembly Member Russell to ask that question.
Thank you, Chair. Baroness Casey said in her review that we give the police exceptional powers and we trust them to use them responsibly. Clearly this practice has been shaken and there's now considerable work the MPS must do to regain the trust of Londoners. Chair, note at the time, I'm happy to send you the answer. And you...
Mr Mayor, actually, I'd really like to hear your full answer on the record today. Sure. I don't think we've got time to actually get into questioning.
Thanks, Caroline. Rebuilding trust in policing is crucial, and the MPS must show how they are treating all Londoners fairly. Live facial recognition was not mentioned in Baroness Casey's report, but following the review, it's right that all aspects of MPS operations are reflected on. The Commissioner will soon be publishing his revised turnaround plan to set the path for the future of the MPS. The appropriate use of live facial recognition can aid the police by locating wanted offenders, including high-risk individuals, identifying suspected terrorists, and locating vulnerable individuals, ultimately helping to keep our communities safe. But this tool must, of course, come with a robust scrutiny, accountability, and transparency. An impartial and evidence-based analysis of live facial recognition by the National Physical Laboratory has provided assurance around the accuracy of the technology, including in relation to demographic disproportionality. The London Policing Ethics Panel has reported on live facial recognition and developed 5 conditions to ensure MPS deployments follow ethical guidance, which the MPS will comply with. To aid transparency, the MPS has published a considerable amount of information about live facial recognition on its website, including the legal framework, impact assessments, and an ethical review. The MPS has also had regular engagement with a wide range of oversight bodies, academic institutions, civil society organisations, and independent advisory groups.
I do apologise, Mr Mayor. The Green Group is now out of time.
I'll send you the answer.
Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Harani, and it concerns centralised funding and power.
Thanks for the question. The UK is one of the most centralised countries in the world. London has limited control over the taxes raised in the capital. The only funding we have control over is raised through a levy on council tax and a supplementary levy on business rates. By contrast, New York has local control over funds from residential and non-residential property taxes, sales, and related taxes and revenues from income taxes. It's a similar story for Paris and Tokyo. In the UK, these funds are spent by remote Whitehall departments. This centralisation leads to London being pitted against other cities in competitive bids for funding pots that waste time and resources. For example, recent unsuccessful bids for enterprise zones cost London Government in the region of £50,000. The rules about what you can spend the money on, the timetable for bidding, the formats for bids, and the selection criteria and processes all vary from one fund to another, and the spending decisions made are often perverse. It was reported last year that some of the wealthiest parts of England had been allocated 10 times more money per capita than the poorest under, inverted commas, levelling up funds. We've been given extra powers, we've delivered. I've led a substantial increase in affordable housing and exceeded skills targets, 2 areas where budgets have been devolved to me.
Thank you, and I'm glad you recognise the issue about the funding impact on not just the GLA but councils across the country, because instead of spending money on core services, they're having to spend money on bid writing, or officers are having to spend time in addition to the actual job. What is the impact on the need to having to apply for funding having on the GLA?
So I gave evidence to the Select Committee on this very issue. And I made the point that not only are councils spending a huge amount of energy, effort, time and money on these bids, but we obviously work with councils. And so we quantified the cost to London. And bearing in mind, of the 139 boroughs that were successful, 139 boroughs successful, only 5 were London boroughs. So we're spending a huge amount of time, effort, money, officer time, but also we're raising expectations that we're going to get this money and we don't. And so we said to the government that the far better way of doing this is block contracts over the longer term, rather than, you know, sort of a Hunger Games of metro mayors and local authorities, which just seems nonsensical to us.
Thank you. A report last year found that the UK is more centralised than any comparable country, and the centralised power leads to an unbalanced economy. Given what we are experiencing in the economy at the moment, do you agree that local councils and the GLA should have greater powers on what happens locally in their area, rather than decisions being made at Whitehall?
Well, the best, of course I do, based upon the evidence I've had for the last 7 years. Look, I mentioned in my answer just 2 areas where that you can see the progress we've made by being in charge of it. Skills. We in London work really closely with the FE sector, with local authorities, but also with businesses, working out where is the skill shortages, so we can have our colleges and academies providing those skills for jobs that are future-proof. Far better us doing it than civil servants in the DfE in Whitehall. The same goes in relation to talking to developers and councils and housing associations in relation to housing starts and so forth. So, you know, the government said a few years ago that they would use a suck it and see in relation to devolution. We've shown we can do it. And by the way, Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester knows his community far better than civil servants in Whitehall, or Andy Street in West Midlands, or, you know, Ben Houchin in Tees Valley, or Steve Rotherham in Liverpool. So my point to the government is, you know, I say this whoever the government was. If there's a Labour government next year, I'll say the same to the Labour government. You know, give powers and resources away to cities and regions across the country. We know our patch, with respect, far better than you do.
Thank you. Another area that has come to my attention due to local casework is around the education sector, where academies are centrally funded and answerable to the Department for Education. By contrast, schools that are funded by local authorities are obviously answerable to them, and that has had a knock-on impact on admissions. In 2009-2010, there were 203 academies across England, and in 2021-22, there were 9,628, which is a rise of 4,700%. This has led to, particularly my constituency, having an impact on admissions, where depending on where people live, they are being excluded on every single category, priority category, for schools in the area they live. What are your views on the decentralisation agenda of this government and the impact that it's having on families in London?
Well, put aside what you think about academies, free schools, or whatever. The lack of coordination is causing real problems. I'll give you some examples of other examples. You mentioned the lack of coordination in admissions, which means families are missing out on going to you know, the school they want to go to. Different schools, because of the academy system, difficult to coordinate in relation to working together with them on exclusions, in relation to keeping children in schools, in relation to provision of free school meals, in relation to after-school clubs, in relation to school support officers. So this, you know, disparate atoms of units we've got of schools is causing real challenges and a whole host of societal problems. And I think, you know, the government's got to realise that they've, you know, I'm sure it wasn't an intended consequence, caused real challenges in communities who see the school as their local school, but it's no local control of the councillors or the local mayor, for example, those are the executive mayors, and even the MP. And so it really is important the government understands the lack of accountability of these atoms of schools, disparate schooling and stuff. And so I'd like to see better coordination. I mean, the VOU's done a great job in some areas. There's so many other areas we do some great work with the academies and the umbrellas and the trust, but it's very hard.
Assembly Member Best.
The Mayor's concerned about councils bidding for funding. Will he abolish that process within the GLA? There was plenty of time to give an answer, so.
The next question.
What have you been smoking today, Tony?
The next question is...
For research purposes, yeah.
Heat pumps.
He's who Keir Starmer was talking about. You've not been in Camden recently, have you?
The last question... Calm down. It'll be over soon, and you can go and
Andrew,
go
listen,
to
he's
playtime.
back in Scully. You should be nice to him.
Next question.
Neil, who are you back in?
The next question is about heat pumps, and it's from Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Sadly, nowhere in the UK is making enough progress on heat pumps. In London, our preferred pathways to hitting net zero by 2030 requires a significant transformation towards the electrification and decarbonisation of heat. But this transformation can only be delivered with greater national action, requiring significantly more investment by government and the private sector. The government must implement the recommendations of the Skidmore Review, ensuring at least 600,000 heat pumps are installed nationally each year by 2028. This will be achieved more efficiently by devolving funds and powers. Through London Plan policies, I secured the installation of heat pumps, saving over 23,000 homes in 2021, up from 13,400 in 2020. My retrofit accelerators and the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund have supported the development and installation of heat pumps within existing homes and workplaces. In Southwark, the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund funded a heat pump system for over 2,000 dwellings. My green skills hubs and academies are helping grow the decarbonisation supply chain needed to support the successful deployment of heat pumps, with £32 million spent on green skills in 21-22. But we need more action from the government through national installation and retrofit schemes, better regulation, and crucially a rebalancing of domestic energy bills, shifting the costs of decarbonisation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'm actually going to loop back to what Assemblymember Polanski was talking about right at the top of this Mayor's Question Time, which was the recent figures that have just come out talking about how we are now very likely to exceed the 1.5 degrees in the next 2 or 3 years, which is really concerning. You had a report that came out at the beginning of 2022 that said that we need to scale up and be installing 2.2 million heat pumps by 2030. So with the best will in the world, although you're doing a lot, we are absolutely nowhere near that. We heard from Community Energy London yesterday that they think only 12 heat pumps were installed in Westminster in the last year. What more can we do in terms of lobbying the government for some sort of incentives to really get going in terms of heat pump installations for those householders who can afford to think about moving away from gas boilers themselves?
I mean, the frustration is, look, even people who want to do the right thing can't afford £15,000, which is the average of heat pump installation. And when I look at countries like Germany, so Germany each year is spending between 13 and 14 billion pounds each year on heat pumps. 13 to 14 billion pounds. We're spending 450 million pounds. So that shows a difference.
Just not on the page, are we?
But they're creating jobs.
Yeah.
They're addressing the climate emergency. They're creating jobs both in terms of making these heat pumps, the workforce installing the heat pumps, and they're saving bills for those who've got heat pumps installed. So I can't for the life of me understand why the government doesn't recognise the opportunity created by the crisis that is a climate emergency.
Even if they came up with a system that's similar to something like the system where somebody gives a grant at the beginning, and then from the savings that you make in your bills, you then start to repay some of the cost, the grant that you've been given.
Well, you'll remember a few years ago they got rid of the feed-in tariff.
They certainly did.
So you know, I think to quote a former Prime Minister, a Conservative one, inverted commas, green crap. Right. Ooh. And we're paying the consequences of those policies a few years ago, because we've got this crisis with, you know, Putin invading Ukraine illegally, a massive increase in the cost of, you know, fossil fuels. Had we invested in renewables, had we had things like the feed-in tariff, heat pumps, people would be struggling less with the cost of living crisis, but also we'd be addressing the climate emergency.
What about people who are in the private rented sector? Is there something that can be done to encourage private landlords to think more about getting rid of gas boilers and replacing them with heat pumps? Is there some sort of incentive that could be brought in there as well?
I think it is difficult with those landlords who are private landlords who own 1 or 2 properties. It's just difficult because it costs so much for the heat pump. Where we are making work is in relation to municipal landlords. I mentioned the example in Southwark where we supported 2,000 dwellings. We're working with Greenwich on a housing estate there as well. So I think private landlords without government support is very hard to support them. And some private landlords want to do the right thing, right? But they can't afford to spend £50,000 on a heat pump. So we're focusing the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund on bigger units of homes for obvious reasons. And that's why I'm saying, look at what Germany's doing. Germany has a culture where more people rent than our owner occupies, yet they're making massive progress by contributions from the government. And a bit more of that. By the USA is doing something similar in relation to support for businesses, but also families as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Let's hope we can scale up from hundreds of millions to billions as we need to. Thank you, Chair.
That was the last question. So can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion, which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Agreed. Date of next meeting. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 2 p.m. this afternoon. So soon. In the chamber here at City Hall. As Chair, there is no urgent business requiring consideration. Therefore, I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.